All right. Enough of that, I guess, for now. I want to start off reading this Walt Whitman thing called Homemade Music. This is in, I believe it's August 8th, 1880. He wrote this, if I'm correct. Might have been earlier than that, but it's in his Specimen days. It says, "Tonight, as I was trying to keep cool sitting by a wounded soldier in Armory Square, I was attracted by some pleasant singing in an adjoining ward. As my soldier was asleep, I left him, and entering the ward where the music was, I walked halfway down and took a seat by the cot of a young Brooklyn friend, S.R., badly wounded in the hand at Chancellorsville, and who has suffered much, but at that moment in the evening was wide awake and comparatively easy. He had turned over on his left side to get a better view of the singers, but the mosquito curtains of the adjoining cots obstructed the sight. I stepped around and looped them, adjoining all up, so that he had a clear show, and then sat down again by him and looked and listened. The principal singer was a young lady nurse of one of the wards, accompanying on a melodeon, and joined by the lady nurses of other wards. They sat there, making a charming group with their handsome, healthy faces, and standing up a little behind them were some 10 or 15 of the convalescent soldiers, young men, nurses, and with books in their hands, singing. Of course, it was not such a performance as the great soloists at the New York Opera House take a hand in. Yet I am not sure, but I received as much pleasure under the circumstances sitting there as I have had from the best Italian compositions expressed by world famous performers. The men lying up and down the hospital in their cots, some badly wounded, some never to rise thence, the cots themselves, with their drapery of white curtains and the shadows down the lower and upper parts of the ward, then the silence of the men and the attitudes they took. The whole was a sight to look around upon again and again. And there sweetly rose those voices up to the high, whitewashed wooden roof, and pleasantly the roof sent it all back again. They sang very well, mostly quaint old songs and declamatory hymns to fitting tunes. Here, for instance, my days are swiftly gliding by, and I, a pilgrim stranger, would not detain them as they fly, those hours of toil and danger. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore we may almost discover. We'll gird our loins, my brethren dear, our distant home discerning. Our absent Lord has left his word, let every lamp be burning. For oh, we stand on Jordan's strand, our friends are passing over, and just before the shining shore we may almost discover. And I was thinking about that because obviously I'm thinking a lot about the Christian metaphysics as always, or the trains in Christian metaphysics or Christian hermeneutics in general. I found it very interesting, the absent Lord whose word has been left, which is kind of there's many stories about absence and presence, obviously, in the Bible, but the most telling one, I think, is Jesus talking about the absent Lord, the Lord who had his absence, and the servants who have to work as if the Lord could come at any time. You have to be busy. You can't just be slack in your duties here. But that's sort of and then, so Jesus comes and he's like, hey, I'm like the messenger I'm like the messenger. I'm the word of God. I'm the word of this absent Lord. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you should be doing, like in the Lord's absence, right? And like how you should be behaving. Because when he comes back, at the end of days, in the last judgment, you won't be want to you don't want to be found slack, or you don't want to be you're going to be judged for your performance here, how you upheld the domain that you've been entrusted with by the Lord. Um, but then Jesus dies, and then Jesus has to go. So it's like, okay, so we've got the absent Lord, and then we also have like the absent Word of God, but we have the presence of the Scripture, of the attestations of the Word of God, and then we have this endless argument over what those words mean, what we're told, what are we supposed to be doing here? What are we supposed to be doing here? And I think that's what we're supposed to be doing here is make some homespun music. That's productivity as far as I can tell. Someone else, I asked people what they wanted me to talk about here, and I'll be taking whoever some requests or whatever if people want to come on and talk. But someone was asking me to talk about Edgar Allan Poe, and I could do that. But what I could also do instead is read you what Walt Whitman has to say about Edgar Allan Poe, which I think is more interesting. But so this is called Edgar Allan Poe's Significance, and he wrote this. This one is in 1880, so the one earlier is probably just right after the Civil War, quite a bit earlier. So this is January 1st, 1880. In diagnosing this disease called humanity, to assume for the nonce what seems a chief mood of the personality and writings of my subject, I have thoughts that poets, somewhere or other on the list, present the most marked indications. Comprehending artists in a mass, musicians, painters, actors, and so on, and considering each and all of them as radiations or flanges of that furious whirling wheel, poetry, the center and axis of the whole, where else indeed may we so well investigate the causes, growths, tally marks of the time, the age's matter and malady. By common consent, there is nothing better for man or woman than a perfect and noble life, morally without flaw, happily balanced in activity, physically sound and pure, giving its due proportion and no more to the sympathetic, the human emotional element, a life in all these unhasting, unresting, untiring to the end. And yet, there is another shape of personality dearer far to the artist's sense, which likes the play of strongest lights and shades, where the perfect character, the good, the heroic, although never attained, is never lost sight of, but through failures, sorrows, temporary downfalls, is returned to again and again, while often violated, is passionately adhered to as long as mind, muscles, voice obey the power we call volition. This sort of personality we see more or less in Burns, Byron, Schiller, and George Sand, but we do not see it in Edgar Allan Poe. All this is the result of reading at intervals the last 3 days a new volume of his poems. I took it on my rambles down by the pond and by degrees read it all through there. While to the character first outlined, the service Poe renders is certainly that entire contrast and contradiction which is next best to fully exemplifying it. Almost without the first sign of moral principle, or of the concrete or its heroisms, or the simpler affectations of the heart, Poe's verses illustrate an intense faculty for technical and abstract beauty, with the rhyming art to excess, an incorrigible propensity toward nocturnal themes, a demoniac undertone behind every page, and by final judgment probably belong among the electric lights of imaginative literature, brilliant and dazzling, but with no heat. There's an indescribable magnetism about the poet's life and reminiscences, as well as the poems. To one who could work out their subtle retracing and retrospect, the latter would make a close tally, no doubt, between the author's birth and antecedents, his childhood and youth, his physique, his so called education, his studies and associates, the literary and social Baltimore, Richmond, Philadelphia, and New York of those times. Not only the places and circumstances in themselves, but often, very often, and a strange spurning of and reaction from them all. The following from a report in the Washington Star of November 16th, 1875, may afford those who care for it something further of my point of view toward this interesting figure and influence of our era. There occurred about that date in Baltimore a public reburial of Poe's remains and dedication of a monument over the grave. Being in Washington on a visit at the time, the old gray went over to Baltimore and though ill from paralysis, consented to hobble up and silently take a seat on the platform, but refused to make any speech, saying, "I have felt a strong impulse to come over and be here today, myself in memory of Poe, which I have obeyed, but not the slightest impulse to make a speech, which, my dear friends, must also be obeyed." In an informal circle, however, in conversation after the ceremonies, Whitman said, "For a long while, and until lately, I had a distance for Poe's writings. I wanted, and still want, for poetry, the clear sun shining and fresh air blowing, the strength and power of health, not of delirium, even amid the stormiest passions, while always the background of the eternal moralities. Non complying with these requirements, Poe's genius has yet conquered a special recognition for itself, and I too have come to fully admit it and appreciate it in him. In a dream I once had, I saw a vessel on the sea at midnight in a storm. It was no great full-rigged ship nor majestic steamer steering firmly through the gale, but seemed one of those superb little schooner yachts I had often seen lying anchored, rocking so jauntily in the waters around New York or up Long Island Sound, now flying uncontrolled with torn sails and broken spars through the wild sleet and wind and waves of the night. On the deck was a slender, slight, beautiful figure, a dim man, apparently enjoying all the terror of the murk and the dislocation of which he was the center and the victim. That figure of my lurid dream might stand for Edgar Allan Poe. His spirit, his fortunes, and his poems, themselves all lurid dreams. Much more may be said, but I most desire to exploit the idea put at the beginning. By its popular poets, the calibers of an age, the weak spots of its embankments, its subcurrents, often more significant than the biggest surface ones, are unerringly indicated. The lush and the weird that have taken such extraordinary possession of 19th century verse lovers. What mean they? The inevitable tendency of poetic culture to morbidity, abnormal beauty, the sickliness of all technical thought or refinement in itself, the abnegation of the perennial and democratic concretes at first hand, the body, the earth and sea, sex and the like, and the substitution of something for them at second or third hand. What bearings have they on current pathological study? So I think that we're still in a time much like that where we have a continued interest in Edgar Allan Poe. It's the same interest people have in Lovecraft, who's kind of taken his position in that schema of things. This interest in the sort of like horrors and the gothic sublime, like you get in horrorcore rap or things like that. Horror movies in general, we kind of have a fixation in our times about this horror, and we are very, very far from celebrating what Whitman would call the democratic concrete, i.e., you can think of someone like maybe like Terrence Malick or something being close to like what he would mean by the democratic concrete, like the most simple of themes, like family life in a Terrence Malick movie, where it lingers on just these open vistas and plains and things like this, and the sun rising and just trees, basic sort of things. We are much more interested in these gothic, Byzantine webs and chthonic spirals of conspiracy, anxieties, etc. The sort of technocratic horror that is so popular. I mean, I myself have written in this mode, but I feel myself leaving this mode more and more and trying to embrace the democratic concrete of normal, everyday themes, the humility of writing poems about the seasons, as opposed to trying to, unearth the ancient old gods like a Nietzschean Zarathustra. So that's been on my mind as of late because I've been working more on my next book, which is trying to leave behind more of the reactionary Gothic tempest of the poetic personality that we seem so obsessed with. I mean, that's why. I mean, why is Bronze Age Mindset such a popular book? Is because it's exactly the portrait of this this person on the fringe in a state of delirium. We like something about that. There's something about that's what Poe's come to be liked for. Am I wrong? Oh. And one more thing I was going to read. This is Roberto Bolaño. I've read this, reread this. It's very short. I've read this so many times, and it's a source of strength for me. So I hope you'll enjoy it. But it's called An Attempt at an Exhaustive Catalog of Patrons by Roberto Bolaño. I never had a patron. No one ever hooked me up with anyone so I could get a grant. No government or institution ever offered me money. No elegant gentleman ever pulled out his checkbook for me. No tremulous lady, quivering with a passion for literature, ever invited me to tea and committed herself to providing me with a meal a day. But over the years, I've come across many patrons in persons or in books. Most common of all is the 40-ish homosexual who suddenly realizes that his life is empty and who devotes himself belatedly to filling it with meaning. Deep down, this kind of patron wants to be an artist with a patron of his own, a 40-ish and violent patron who in turn also has a patron, who in turn is taken up by other patrons, and so on ad infinitum. Generally, the works that excite this kind of patron are faux self-portraits. There's also the patron with blood ties. It's usually the brother or sister of the artist or poet in question, and the relationship between the two of them is like the bond between a bird and a crag. In these circumstances, desperation goes by the name of love. Defeat on all fronts is assured. Then comes the invisible patron. His protege will never be on first name terms with him. In fact, in some cases, he'll never see him. The invisible patron is capable of raping a writer without the writer even noticing. The invisible patron isn't a meek and prudent soul as one might imagine. On the contrary, he's usually a clever brute. Then we have the melancholy grandma, who isn't the grandmother of her proteges, of course, or even a great aunt, and who to a certain degree resembles those elderly Russian ladies, lovers of literature, who for a time filled the streets of Paris, Venice, and Geneva. The grandmas dress impeccably. They talk about Proust as if they'd known him. Sometimes they reminisce about candlelit evenings in palaces one has never heard of. They possess, out of ignorance, a high regard for authors who've been translated into more than 3 languages, and their collections of dictionaries and encyclopedias are often impressive. They're in danger of extinction. In no danger of extinction, meanwhile, are the cultural attaches who, on nights when the moon is full, imagine themselves patrons. It goes without saying, since everybody takes it for granted that cultural attaches are more attache than cultural. During their brief reigns, their friends take what they can get, which may not be much, but which for them is a lot, everything. Also, in no danger of extinction are those Latin American professors at American universities. Their idea of the patron is based on brute force and boundless cowardice. Most are on the left, politically speaking. To attend a dinner with them and their favorites is like gazing into a creepy diorama in which the chief of a clan of cavemen gnaws a leg while his acolytes nod and laugh. The patron professor in Illinois or Iowa or South Carolina resembles Stalin, and that's the strangest and most original thing about him. Then comes an amorphous mass of patrons of different stripes and assorted misfortunes. There are the neurotic virgins, the good Samaritans, the sourpusses, the frustrated housewives, the suicidal bureaucrats, the poet who suddenly discovers he has no talent, the person who thinks no one understands him, the drunk who recites Sallustius, the fat man who wishes he were thin, the bitter man who wants to create a new canon, the neo structuralist who doesn't understand half of what he says, the priest who yearns for hell, the lady who insists on good manners, the businessman who writes sonnets. Behind this crowd, however, hides the one true patron. If you have patience enough to search, maybe you'll catch a glimpse of what you're looking for. And when you find it, you'll probably be disappointed. It isn't the devil. It isn't the state. It isn't a magical child. It's the void. And I think about that every time I think about who I'm writing for. Nobody. I think that's who you have to write for, ultimately. It doesn't matter anyway, right? Someone else wanted me to talk about the where is it in here? We've got more Walt Whitman talking about Thomas Carlyle and Hegel. So this is a funny thing I think about Whitman is that people treat him. At least I did. I mean, I didn't read Whitman. I was an idiot too for a while. People treat him as if he's just this like like woo, just like a woo, whoa, like just being a dork. I don't know, just being like a happy-go-lucky dork. But He has a lot of substance, more substance than most. And so when he writes about someone, he's going to cut to the marrow on it, and that's what he's really great on. Is he just tells it straight. Doesn't dress things up in fanciness. He speaks about the democratic concrete, keeping things simple, but cutting them down to their absolute necessities. But he also has like he's a wide traveling man, especially intellectually. He's read a million things. He's read more than most people. And he's not this naive, bumbler who just, is like a little bird who happens to make this particular sort of sound. The way some people think about poets is, they just open their mouth. I forget. There's like a utilitarian who said that poets are like they're like birds that like happen to make a pleasant sound when they're in pain. So it's kind of like oh, an artist is. It's like that's the kind of prevailing mode of the notion of like art, where it's just like oh, just like just like just like without any sort of anything, just like do whatever and like it's you and like you're the art really. You're like a bird, and like if you just make your bird song, then whatever. Anyway, this is the death of Thomas Carlyle. He wrote this in February 10th of 1881. And so the flame of the lamp, after long wasting and flickering, has gone out entirely. As a representative author, a literary figure, no man else will bequeath to the future more significant hints of our stormy era, its fierce paradoxes, its din, and its struggling parturition periods than Carlyle. He belongs to our own branch of the stock, too, neither Latin nor Greek, but altogether Gothic, rugged, mountainous, volcanic. He was himself more a French Revolution than any of his volumes. In some respects, so far in the 19th century, the best equipped, keenest mind, even from the college point of view, of all Britain. Only he had an ailing body. Dyspepsia is to be traced in every page, and now and then fills the page. One may include among the lessons of his life, even though that life stretched to amazing length, how behind the tally of genius and morals stands the stomach, and gives a sort of casting vote. Two conflicting agonistic elements seem to have contended in the man, sometimes pulling him different ways like wild horses. He was a cautious, conservative Scotchman, fully aware what a fetid gas bag much of modern radicalism is. But then his great heart demanded reform, demanded change, often terribly at odds with his scornful brain. No author ever put so much wailing and despair into his books, sometimes palpable, oftener latent. He reminds me of that passage in Young's poem where as death presses closer and closer for his prey, the soul rushes hither and thither, appealing, shrieking, berating to escape the general doom. Of shortcomings, even positive blur spots from an American point of view, he had serious share. Not for his merely literary merit, although that was great, not as maker of books, but as launching into the self complacent atmosphere of our days a rasping, questioning, dislocating, agitation, and shock is Carlyle's final value. It is time the English speaking peoples had some true idea about the vertebra of genius, namely power, as if they must always have it cut and biased to the fashion like a lady's cloak. What a needed service he performs. How he shakes our comfortable reading circles with a touch of the old Hebraic anger and prophecy. And indeed, it is just the same. Not Isaiah himself, more scornful, more threatening. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, shall be trodden under feet, and the glorious beauty which is on the head of the fat valley shall be a fading flower. The word prophecy is much misused. It seems narrowed to prediction mostly. That is not the main sense of the Hebrew word translated prophet. It means one whose mind bubbles up and pours forth as a fountain from inner, divine spontaneities revealing God. Prediction is a very minor part of prophecy. The great matter is to reveal and outpour the godlike suggestions pressing for birth in the soul. This is briefly the doctrine of the Friends or Quakers. Then the simplicity and amid ostensible frailty, the towering strength of this man, a hardy oak knot, you could never wear out. An old farmer dressed in brown clothes and not handsome, his very foibles fascinating. Who cares what he wrote about Dr. Francia and shooting Niagara or the N-word question, and didn't at all admire our United States? I doubt if he ever thought or said half as bad words about us as we deserve. How he splashes like Leviathan in the seas of modern literature and politics. Doubtless, respecting the latter, one needs first to realize from actual observation the squalor, vice, and doggedness ingrained in the bulk of the population of the British Islands, with the red tape, the fatuity, the flunkeyism everywhere, to understand the last meaning in his pages. Accordingly, there was no Chartist or radical. I consider Carlyle's by far the most indignant comment or protest anent the fruits of feudalism today in Great Britain, the increasing poverty and degradation of the homeless, landless 20 millions, while a few thousands, or rather a few hundreds, possess the entire soil, the money, and the fat berths. Trade and shipping and clubs and culture and prestige and guns and a fine select class of gentry and aristocracy with every modern improvement cannot begin to salve or defend such stupendous hoggishness. The way to test how much he has left his country were to consider, or try to consider for a moment, the array of British thought, the restaurant ensemble of the last 50 years as existing today, but with Carlyle left out. It'd be like an army with no artillery. The show were still a gay and rich one: Byron, Scott, Tennyson, and many more, horsemen and rapid infantry and banners flying. But the last heavy roar, so dear to the ear of the trained soldier and that settles fates and victories, would be lacking. For the last 3 years, we in America have had transmitted glimpses of a thin-bodied, lonesome, wifeless, childless, very old man lying on a sofa, kept out of bed by indomitable will, but of late never well enough to take the open air. I have noted this news from time to time in brief descriptions in the papers. A week ago, I read such an item just before I started out for my customary evening stroll between 8 and 9. In the fine cold night, unusually clear, February 5th of 81, as I walked, some open grounds adjacent, the condition of Carlyle and his approaching, perhaps even the actual death, filled me with thoughts eluding statement and curiously blending with the scene. The planet Venus, an hour high in the west, with all her volume and luster recovered, she has been shorn and languid for nearly a year, including an additionally sentiment I never noticed before. Not merely voluptuous, Paphian, steeping, fascinating, now with calm, commanding seriousness and hauteur, the Milo Venus now, upward to the zenith, Jupiter, Saturn, and the moon past her quarter, trailing in procession, with the Pleiades following, and the constellation Taurus and red Aldebaran. Not a cloud in heaven. Orion strode through the southeast with his glittering belt, and a trifle below hung the sun of the night, Sirius. Every star dilated, more vitreous, nearer than usual. Not as in some clear nights when the larger stars entirely outshine the rest. Every little star clustered just as distinctly visible and just as nigh. Berenice's hair showing every gem and new ones. To the northeast and north, the sickle, the goat and kids, Cassiopeia, Castor and Pollux, and the two dippers. While through the whole of this silent, indescribable show, enclosing and bathing, my whole receptivity ran the thought of Carlyle dying. To soothe and spiritualize and, as far as may be, solve the mysteries of death and genius, consider them under the stars at midnight. And now that he is gone hence, can it be that Thomas Carlyle, soon to chemically dissolve in ashes and by winds, remains an identity still? In ways perhaps eluding all the statements, lore, and speculation of 10,000 years, eluding all possible statements to mortal sense, does he yet exist, a definite, vital being, a spirit, an individual, perhaps now wafted in space among those stellar systems which, suggestive and limitless as they are, merely edge more limitless, far more suggestive systems? I have no doubt of it. In silence of a night, such given questions are answered to the soul, the best answers that can be given. With me, too, when depressed by some specially sad event or tearing problem, I wait till I go out under the stars for the last voiceless satisfaction. All right, take a break for a second. I need to take a drink of this before we go into. This is his great praise of Carlyle, saying like, here's all the criticisms. Oh yeah, you use racist, whatever. Oh yeah, who cares? That doesn't matter. He's the artillery of 19th century English poetry. In the way I would say that Wyndham Lewis is like the artillery, who's very much a Carlylean, taking up his same style, and is hated for the very same reason. Although anyone with any poetic genius would appreciate people and poets without having to agree with them, such a vulgar notion. But this is later thoughts and jottings. Carlyle from an American point of view. There is surely at present an inexplicable rapport, all the more piquant from its contradictoriness, between the deceased author and our United States of America, no matter whether it lasts or not. It will be difficult for the future, judging by his books, personal dissympathies, and to account for the deep hold this author has taken on the present age and the way he has colored its method and thought. I'm certainly at a loss to account for it all as affecting myself, but there could be no view or even partial picture of the middle and later part of our 19th century that did not markedly include Thomas Carlyle. In his case, and as so many others, literary productions, works of art, personal identities, events, there's been an impalpable something more effective than the palpable. Then I find no better text. It is always important to have a definite, special, even oppositional living man to start from, for sending out certain speculations and comparisons for home use. Let us see what they amount to. Those reactionary doctrines, fears, scornful analysis of democracy, even from the most erudite and sincere mind of Europe. As we Westerners assume definite shape and result in formations and fruitage unknown before, it is curious with what a new sense our eyes turn to representative outgrowths of crises and personages in the old world. Beyond question, since Carlyle's death and the publication of Froude's memoirs, not only the interest in his books, but every personal bit regarding the famous Scotchman, his dyspepsia, his buffetings, his parentage, his paragon of a wife, his career in Edinburgh and the lonesome nest on Craigenputtock Moor, and then so many years in London, is probably wider and livelier today in this country than in his own land. Whether I succeed or no, I too, reaching across the Atlantic and taking the man's dark fortune telling of humanity and politics, would offset it all. Such is the fancy that comes to me, by a far more profound horoscoping of those themes. Hegel's. Not the least mentionable part of the case, a streak it may be of that humor with which history and fate love to contrast their gravity, is that although neither of my great authorities during their lives considered the United States worthy of serious mention, all the principal works of both might not inappropriately be this day collected and bound up under the conspicuous title, quote, Speculations for the Use of North America and Democracy There, with the relations of the same to metaphysics, including lessons and warnings, encouragements to, and of the vastest, from the old world to the new. First, about a chance and never fulfilled vacuity of this pale cast of thought, this British Hamlet from Cheyne Row, more puzzling than the Danish one, with his contrivances for settling the broken and spavined joints of the world's government, especially in its democratic dislocation. Carlyle's grim fate was cast to live and dwell in, and largely embody, the parturition, agony, and qualms of the old order, amid crowded accumulations of ghastly morbidity, giving birth to the new. But conceive of him, or his parents before him, coming to America, recuperated by the cheering realities and activity of our people and country, growing up and delving face to face resolutely among us here, especially at the West, inhaling and exhaling our limitless air and eligibilities, devoting his mind to the theories and developments of this republic amid its practical facts, as exemplified in Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Tennessee, or Louisiana. I say facts, and face-to-face confrontings, so different from books and all those quiddities and mere reports in the libraries, upon which the man, it was wittily said of him at the age of 30 that there was no one in Scotland who had gleaned so much and seen so little, almost wholly fed, which even his sturdy and vital mind but reflected at best. Something of the sort narrowly escaped happening. In 1835, after more than a dozen years of trial and non-success, the author of Sartor Resartus, removing to London, very poor, a confirmed hypochondriac, Sartor universally scoffed at, no literary prospects ahead, deliberately settled on one last casting throw of the literary dice. resolved to compose and launch forth a book on the subject of the French Revolution, and if that won no higher guerdon or prize than hitherto to sternly abandon the trade of author forever and emigrate for good to America. But the venture turned out a lucky one, and there was no emigration. Carlyle's work in the sphere of literature, as he commenced and carried it out, is the same in one or two leading respects that Immanuel Kant's was in speculative philosophy. But the Scotchman had none of the stomachic phlegm and never perturbed placidity of the Königsberg sage, and did not, like the latter, understand his own limits and stop when he had got the end of them. He clears away jungle and poison vine and underbrush, at any rate hacks valiantly at them, smiting hip and thigh. Kant did the like in his sphere, and it was all he professed to do. His labors have left the ground fully prepared ever since, and greater service was probably never performed by mortal man. But the pang and hiatus of Carlyle seems to me to contrast in the evidence everywhere that amid a whirl of fog and fury and cross purpose, he firmly believed he had a clue to the medication of the world's ills, and that his bounden mission was to exploit it. I hope I shall not myself fall into the error I charge upon him of prescribing a specific for indispensable evils. My utmost pretension is probably but to offset that old claim of the exclusively curative power of first-class individual men as leaders and rulers by the claims and general movement and result of ideas. Something of the latter kind seems to me the distinctive theory of America, of democracy, and of the modern. Rather, I should say, it is democracy and is the modern. There are two anchors or sheet anchors for steadying as a last resort the Carlylean ship. One will be specified presently. The other, perhaps the main, was only to be found in some marked form of personal force and extreme degree of competent urge and will, a man or men born to command. Probably there ran through every vein and current of the Scotchman's blood something that warmed up to this kind of trait and character above aught else in the world, which makes him, in my opinion, the chief celebrator and promulger of it in literature, more than Plutarch, more than Shakespeare. The great masses of humanity stand for nothing, at least nothing but nebulous raw material, only the big planets and shining suns for him. To ideas almost invariably languid or cold, a number one forceful personality was sure to rouse his eulogistic passion and savage joy. In such case, even the standard of duty hereinafter raised was to be instantly lowered and veiled. All that is comprehended under the terms republicanism and democracy were distasteful to him from the first, and as he grew older, they became hateful and contemptible. For an undoubtedly candid and penetrating faculty such as his, the bearings he persistently ignored were marvelous. For instance, the promise, nay, certainty of the democratic principle to each and every state of the current world, not so much of helping it to perfect legislators and executives, but as the only effectual method for surely, however slowly, training people on a large scale toward voluntarily ruling and managing themselves, the ultimate aim of political and all other development, to gradually reduce the fact of governing to its minimum, and to subject all its staffs and their doings to the telescopes and microscopes of committees and parties, and greatest of all to afford, not stagnation and obedient content, which went well enough with the feudalism and ecclesiasticism of the antique and medieval world, but a vast, insane, recurrent ebb and tide action for those floods of the great deep that have henceforth palpably burst forever their old bounds, seem never to have entered Carlyle's thought. It was splendid how he refused any compromise to the last. He was curiously antique, and that harsh, picturesque, most potent voice and figure one seems to be carried back from the present of the British Islands more than 2,000 years to the range between Jerusalem and Tarsus. His fullest, best biographer justly says of him, he was a teacher and a prophet in the Jewish sense of the word. The prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah have become a part of the permanent spiritual inheritance of mankind because events proved that they had interpreted correctly the signs of their own times, and their prophecies were fulfilled. Carlyle, like them, believed that he had a special message to deliver to the present age. Whether he was correct in that belief or whether his message was a true message remains to be seen. He has told us that our most cherished ideas of political liberty, with their kindred corollaries, are mere illusions, and that the progress which has seemed to go along with them is a progress toward anarchy and social dissolution. If he was wrong, he has misused his powers. The principles of his teachings are false. He has offered himself as a guide upon a road of which he had no knowledge, and his own desire for himself would be the speediest oblivion both of his person and his works. If, on the other hand, he has been right, if, like his great predecessors, he has read truly the tendencies of this modern age of ours and his teaching is authenticated by facts, then Carlyle, too, will take his place among the inspired seers. To which I add an amendment that under no circumstances, and no matter how completely time and events disprove his lurid vaticinations, should the English speaking world forget this man, nor fail to hold in honor his unsurpassed conscience, his unique method, and his honest fame. Never were convictions more earnest and genuine. Never was there less of a flunky or temporizer. Never had political progressivism a foe it could more heartily respect. The second main point of Carlyle's utterance was the idea of duty being done. It is simply a new codicil, if it be particularly new, which is by no means certain, on the time honored bequest of dynasticism, the mold eaten rules of legitimacy and kings. He seems to have been impatient sometimes to madness when reminded by persons who thought at least as deeply as himself that this formula, though precious, is rather a vague one, and that there are many other considerations to a philosophical estimate of each and every department, either in general history or individual affairs. Altogether, I don't know anything more amazing than these persistent strides and throbbing so far through our 19th century of perhaps its biggest, sharpest, and most erudite brain in defiance and discontent with everything, contemptuously ignoring either from constitutional inaptitude, ignorance itself, or more likely because he demanded a definite cure all here and now, the only solace and solvent to be had. There is, apart from mere intellect, in the makeup of every superior human identity, its moral completedness, considering as ensemble, not for that moral alone, but for the whole being, including physique, a wondrous something that realizes without argument, frequently without what is called education, though I think it the goal and apex of all education, deserving the name, an intuition of the absolute balance in time and space of the whole of this multifarious mad chaos of fraud, frivolity, hoggishness, this revel of fools and incredible make believe and general unsettledness we call the world, a soul sight of that divine clue and unseen thread which holds the whole congeries of things, all history and time, and all events, however trivial, however momentous, like a leash dog in the hand of the hunter. Such soul sight and root center for the mind, mere optimism explains only the surface or the fringe of it. Carlyle was mostly, perhaps entirely, without. He seems instead to have been haunted in the play of his mental action by a spectre, never entirely laid from first to last. Greek scholars, I believe, find the same mocking and fantastic apparition attending Aristophanes, his comedies, the spectre of world destruction. How largest triumph of failure in human life in war or peace may depend on some little hidden centrality, hardly more than a drop of blood, a pulse beat, or a breath of air. It is certain that all these weighty matters, democracy in America, Carlylism, and the temperament for deepest political or literary explanation, turn on a simple point in speculative philosophy. The most profound theme that can occupy the mind of man, the problem on whose solution science, art, the bases and pursuits of nations, and everything else, including intelligent human happiness, here today, 1882, New York, Texas, California, the same as all times, all lands, subtly and finally resting, depends for competent outset and argument, is doubtless involved in the query. What is the fusing explanation and tie? What the relation between the radical democratic me, the human identity of understanding emotions and spirits and see on the one side, and with the conservative not me, the whole of the material objective universe and laws with what is behind them in time and space on the other side. Immanuel Kant, though he explained or partially explained, as may be said, the laws of the human understanding, left this question an open one. Schelling's answer or suggestion of answer is and very valuable and important as far as it goes, that the same general and particular intelligence, passions, even the standards of right and wrong, which exist in a conscious and formulated state in man, exist in an unconscious or imperceptible analogies throughout the entire universe of external nature, and all its objects, large or small, and all its movements and processes, thus making the impalpable human mind and concrete nature, notwithstanding their duality and separation, convertible, and in centrality and essence, one. But Hegel's fuller statement of the matter probably remains the last best word that has been said upon it up to date. Substantially adopting the scheme just epitomized, he so carries it out and fortifies it and merges everything in it, with certain serious gaps now for the first time filled, that becomes a coherent metaphysical system and substantial answer, as far as there can be any answer, to the foregoing question. A system which, while I distinctly admit that the brain of the future may add to, revise, and even entirely reconstruct, at any rate, beams forth today in its entirety, illuminating the thought of the universe and satisfying the mystery thereof to the human mind with a more consoling scientific assurance than any yet. According to Hegel, the whole earth, an old nucleus thought as in the Vedas, and no doubt before, but never hitherto brought so absolutely to the front, fully surcharged with modern scientism and facts, and made the sole entrance to each and all, with its infinite variety, the whole earth with its infinite variety, the past, the surroundings of today, or what may happen in the future, the contrarieties of material with spiritual, and of natural with artificial, are all, to the eye of the ensemblist, but necessary sides and unfoldings, different steps or links in the endless process of creative thought, which amid numberless apparent failures and contradictions is held together by central and never broken unity. Not contradictions or failures at all, but radiations of one consistent and eternal purpose, the whole mass of everything steadily, unerringly tending and flowing toward the permanent util and morale, as rivers to oceans, as life is the whole law and incessant effort of the visible universe, and death only the other invisible side of the same. So the util, so truth, so health are the continuous, immutable laws of the moral universe, and vice and disease, with all their perturbations, are but transient, even if ever so prevalent expressions. To politics throughout, Hegel applies the like Catholic standard and faith. Not any one party or any one form of government is absolutely and exclusively true. Truth consists in the just relations of objects to each other. A majority or democracy may rule as outrageously and do as great harm as an oligarchy or despotism, though far less likely to do so. But the great evil is either a violation of the relation just referred to or of the moral law. The specious, the unjust, the cruel, and what is called the unnatural, though not only permitted, but in a certain sense, like shade to light, inevitable in the divine scheme, are by the whole constitution of that scheme partial, inconsistent, temporary, and though having ever so great an ostensible majority, are certainly destined to failure after causing great suffering. Theology, Hegel translates into science. All apparent contradictions in the statements of the deific nature by different ages, nations, churches, points of view are but fractional and imperfect expressions of one essential unity from which they all proceed. Crude endeavors or distorted parts to be regarded both as distinct and united. In short, to put it in our form or summing up, that thinker, analyzer, or overlooker who, by an inscrutable combination of trained wisdom and natural intuition, most fully accepts in perfect faith the moral unity and sanity of the creative scheme in history, science, and all life and time, present and future, is both the truest cosmical devotee or religioso and the profoundest philosopher. While he who, by the spell of himself and his circumstance, sees darkness and despair in the sum of the workings of God's providence, and who in that denies or prevaricates, is, no matter how much piety plays on his lips, the most radical sinner and infidel. I am the more assured in recounting Hegel a little freely here. I have deliberately repeated it all, not only in offset to Carlyle's ever lurking pessimism and world decadence, but as presenting the most thoroughly American point of view I know. In my opinion, the above formula of Hegel are an essential and crowning justification of New World democracy in the creative realms of time and space. There is that about them which only the vastness,
the multiplicity and the vitality of America would seem able to comprehend, to give scope and illustration to, or be fit for, or even originate. It is strange to me that they were born in Germany or in the Old World at all, while a Carlyle should say is quite the legitimate European product to be expected. Not only I am the more assured in recounting Hegel a little freely here, not only for offsetting the Carlylean letter and spirit, cutting it all out all and several from the very roots and below the roots, but to counterpoise, since the late death and deserved apotheosis of Darwin, the tenets of the evolutionist. Unspeakably precious as those are to biology and henceforth indispensable to a right aim and estimate and study, they neither compromise or explain everything, and the last word or whisper still remains to be breathed after the utmost of those claims, floating high and forever above them all, and above technical metaphysics. Well, the contributions which German Kant and Fichte and Schelling and Hegel have bequeathed to humanity, and which English Darwin has also in the field, are indispensable to the erudition of America's future. I should say that in all of them, and the best of them, when compared with the lightning flashes and flights of the old prophets and exaltes, the spiritual poets and poetry of all lands, as in the Hebrew Bible, there seems to be, nay, certainly is, something lacking, something cold, a failure to satisfy the deepest emotions of the soul, a want of living glow, fondness, warmth, which the old exaltes and poets supply, and which the keenest modern philosophers so far do not. Upon the whole, and for our purposes, this man's name certainly belongs on the list with the just specified first-class moral physicians of our current era, with Emerson and two or three others, though his prescription is drastic and perhaps destructive, while theirs is assimilating, normal, and tonic. Feudal at his core and mental offspring and radiations of feudalism as are his books, they afford ever valuable lessons and affinities to democratic America. Nations or individuals we surely learn deepest from unlikeness, from a sincere opponent, from the light thrown even scornfully on dangerous spots and liabilities. Michelangelo invoked heaven's special protection against his fiends and affectionate flatterers, palpable foes he could manage for himself. In many particulars, Carlyle was indeed, as Froude terms him, one of those far-off Hebraic utterers, a new Micah or Habakkuk. His words at times bubble forth with abysmic inspiration. Always precious, such men, as precious now as any time. His rude, rasping, taunting, contradictory tones, what ones are more wanted amid the supple, polished, money-worshipping Jesus and Judas equalizing suffrage sovereignty echoes of current America. He has lit up our 19th century with the light of a powerful, penetrating, and perfectly honest intellect of the first class, turned on British and European politics, social life, literature, and representative personages, thoroughly dissatisfied with all and mercilessly exposing the illness of all. But while he announces the malady and scolds and raves about it, he himself, born and bred in the same atmosphere, is a marked illustration of it. I can't write better than that, but that's basically. I mean, that's how I feel essentially about people's feelings on this cancel culture, et cetera, et cetera. This idea that opposition is true friendship, as Blake said. So really, this has been my problem my entire life. Really, is that I start out. I'm like starting out. I'm a young lad who's very much a Democrat in the term that Whitman would use it to mean, meaning, I want the flourishing of the Commonwealth. So I go into, reading all the communist and anarchist literature, et cetera, et cetera. And all these people just are fetid gas bags. They can't talk about reality in any real way. At least the most part, they've, the Jesus and Judas equalizing of this sort of scene. So I found myself reading Carlyle. I read a lot of Carlyle. I read a lot of these reactionaries and these right-wing people because I think that's good. I think it's good to do that. And I think that the future is the ensemble, the ensemblist, the holistic view of things that Whitman is talking about here. The balancing of all these things, not being a partisan, but a type of true Catholicity in the meaning, in the way the Rosicrucians meant this, the invisible church that everyone's a member of, whether or not they know it. The Church of Providence, the creative the development of mankind. We're all in it together here, whether or not you want to be. I think that's the future. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I was reading Bolingbroke, who John Adams read his entire works multiple times, but he was an old Whig from a generation before a generation before the founding fathers, who wrote a book, a little pamphlet called it was like his Machiavellian Mirror to Princes. Like this genre of giving advice to and for good government. He says that the whole meaning of everything is good government, and that's exactly what Whitman's saying here about Hegel. The truth is not about a particular thing; it's about the correct relations between things, i.e., the good government of things, whether that's concepts in a metaphysic, in a system, or if it's subjects in the material reality of the economy, etc. Good governance is truth. Truth is good governance. That's why, and that's why Jesus is a king, etc. But in this pamphlet, which I highly recommend reading. I mean, I could sit here and read the whole damn thing too, maybe. Called "The Patriot King," on the idea of a patriot king. I think this is sort of what Haas has been getting at when he talks about the malign sovereigns and people like Xi Jinping and things like that. As I think he was calling them gangster kings, but it's really the patriot kings. That's what America was designed to set up. That's what John Adams wanted this whole system to do, was to have the president act as a patriot king. That's the whole idea, is that you would have someone who is devoted in earnest to this project of the Commonwealth, and not in a partisan manner, not in a manner of representing a particular interest, but trying to represent the entire interest, the Commonwealth in itself. That's why it was a patriot king, because a king is like it's a synecdoche. The king is the one who represents the many, and we can see how the oligarchic factions and fractions have perpetually warred against the patriot king. I mean, even a lot of the monarchists, what they like a monarch for, they don't want a patriot king. They just want a king who represents the oligarchic interest against the people, against the many. Really, the thing that we're constantly looking for, everyone in politics, is the one who represents the many. That's it. It's that simple. But we got a bunch of people, but everyone's representing the few. There's not really, it's very few people who I can conceive of who earnestly seek to represent the many. But the person in my lifetime who I think did that best, I don't think it was Donald Trump, but Donald Trump certainly tried. I think it was Ron Paul. Like, I think Ron Paul, like, imagine Ron Paul, if we'd put Ron Paul in as the king of America into the year 2012 or 2008. You think things would be different? I don't know. If we gave him the powers of a patriot king to dissolve all of these things, I don't know. I think because there's something about these old libertarians, which I think that a lot of people on the left, people who generally want a flourishing the Commonwealth, they don't understand people who call themselves capitalists, and this is also the reason why they hate Deng Xiaoping. The same reason that they don't actually trust that people acting of their own accord can produce like they want everything to be dictatorial in the sense of forced, in the sense of like the state action. But I don't think that communism, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to call our ideal political, the true governance of America, will be a massive centralized bureaucracy which determines everything, like this vision that people have of the Soviet Union, which is why American patriots are extremely opposed to the word socialism and communism, is because they infer from these terms that it'll be this oppressive monarchy, like an old feudal, like monarchy in the old sense, where it's like the domination of aristoco bureaucrats and intellectuals who don't allow them any breathing room to do what they're going to try anything for themselves. So I think, think about if we eliminated all of America's, brought all the military home, right? We eliminate that 50% of our tax expenditure. Ron Paul would have balanced that budget in like 2 years, would have just cut all the spending, all that spending, would have cut taxes, cut all those taxes. What do you think we'd do with all that, Like, do you think we just fucking do, like, people don't trust the people, you know, like especially on the left, they don't trust that if you allowed people to make decisions for themselves, that we could like produce like a more engaged citizenry. And the fact that if like everyone has more and has more investment in the sense that they have more assets in their areas, that they would like actually produce better things than exist now. There's this like notion where it's like you can't trust your neighbor. No one trusts anyone here. We have very low trust, and that's why we want like to just take over the state so that we can make sure that the people we don't trust are forced to do what we want. But it's like a very radical act now to be like, hey, I'm not a partisan. Like I don't. No one believes you. It's like it's you know what I mean. Anyway, I'm rambling now. If anyone wants to come on and ask me anything, I got some comments. I guess I'll look at them. Oh, just random comments. Word. Nothing much then. Oh, okay. We got someone here, Christian. What could I do for you?
Hello.
Howdy.
Hey, man. I had a question for you, and I hopped in a little late, so if this is like off theme for what you're talking about today, just move on. It's fine. But in terms of like a lot of your political ideology, I find it super exciting. So first off, just like thank you for putting all this out there for people to stew on. But something I've been thinking a lot about is just like that I don't see you writing as much about is just like, do you have thoughts on just like the like praxis of these ideas? Like, what do you see as like, not that it's going to be easy, but like the lowest hanging fruit or like the first steps? Like, what kind of projects do you think are most exciting when it comes to trying to actually implement these ideas? Like, I was kind of messaging you about a
Um,
couple things.
so I
Like,
saw the Moravian Church was
yeah,
buying up
yeah, yeah,
debts from debt collection agencies
right, fucking
and then just
amazing.
burning them. I think that's the most exciting thing I've seen recently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just like basically like organized like direct action among like a group of people trying to like put their money where their mouth is on this stuff.
Well, it's like a church that's actually following the Lord's Prayer and like actively forgiving debts and things like that. I mean, I think that in some respects, America is like distinct from people who are obsessed with political parties, etc. I think are kind of like they're not seeing like that the spirit of America moves through like these sort of like churches, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like in
yeah.
these various like societies. Like for instance, we're in a like I produce this little society right here, and it's all like people just voluntarily joining it. I think that's the best thing you can do is to like produce these sorts of societies and make them places that aren't just like torturous or like weaponized things, but to try to make like a little society in which anyone could effectively be welcomed. I guess like, but without like that's why we have all these arguments now over like can't like what how do we then govern these little societies? It's like okay, well there's this official like style code for like what can and cannot be said, and there's the no tolerance for intolerance and things like that. But this is like, hey, like the whole thing I was reading Whitman, right? Perhaps the most intolerant man in the entirety of the British Empire was Thomas Carlyle. And anyone who would not accept Thomas Carlyle at their table is not worth tolerating either. Like this is the exact people that we have to tolerate are the intolerant. We have to tolerate people who are hateful and who harbor bigotries, etc. Because it's like if you're creating these little societies and it's only for saints and the elect or whatever, then you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything at all. Like Jesus tells you to loan money to people you know can't pay it back. Because if you only loan money to people who can pay you back, then what are better are you than anyone else? That's all anyone. That's what a banker does. You know, like the actual
Mhm.
good requires this type of like divestment of things. So that's why it's like I think you have to be willing to like you're going to be crucified, you know. I don't know, like that's the hard thing. I've tried to do what I can do in my limited stature here, and I am like, you know, I'm literally literally like targeted by fucking domestic terror groups all the time here, and I don't want like I don't know like what can we do. I'm doing this. I don't have all the answers obviously.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, like, other things I've definitely thought about like faith group organizing, like church organizing. I also think a lot about unions. A lot of them are obviously bullshit, but I do see it as like an infrastructure that could be captured potentially as like low hanging fruit. I also think about like electoral
I
work.
think it's
I mean,
really
like a
like
lot of local.
you have to like the thing is that it's like you have to devote yourself entirely to like the concrete, and that means like look around you right now. That's what's concrete to you. You're surrounded by it, so you have to devote
Yeah.
yourself to like what you actually have control over, because or like any type of influence over. So
Yeah.
like you know become involved in.
Just like start where you have the most
Yeah, well,
influence.
it's like, I don't know. I'm up here in New England. It's like if you were anyone here, you could run for any of the positions for public office on this small level. And if you brought like the kind of sensibility that of like a 21st century sensibility of the kind that like we have here, it's like you could bring this platform to people. You know what I mean? Like to try to apply it at the most local level. You know, just like you can actively and if you're going to do civil disobedience in America, you should do it from a perch of actual like civic power. So let's say I brought this up before. Michael Hudson suggested doing this too, which is if you like become like of the mayor of a town or something, you become any of these sorts of things. You have any sort of local sort of power. You can practice civil disobedience from there. You'd be like, yeah, we're not gonna allow the fucking people to foreclose on people's houses here. Like the bank, no, they're just not gonna allow it. And then you
For
let them
sure.
take this take you to court. Like it's gonna come from like sacrificing your life and your well-being. Like it's not gonna come from being a celebrity and like having a nice cozy time of it and being celebrated. It's gonna come from uh fucking getting crucified. Like that's how it always is.
Right. Right on. Well, thanks, man. I'll let you move on to somebody else.
Word, man. Nice talking to you.
Yeah.
All right, who's up next? We're doing a customer service hours now because I got nothing else to say really. I could just read like I don't know. I'm a those are the things I've been thinking of. I guess I could go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Since I was reading that Michael Hudson thing, and God, what was that guy? Colin Dumb. That no, that guy who I read. I was recommending his dissertation, and I was like, hey, you want to come on and talk about your dissertation on like monetary theory and Elizabethan politics? He was like, oh, I don't want to associate with you. Like that would be bad for my academic career. It's like this is the real problem. Is like I don't understand. Like I extend my olive branch out, my liberality, constantly rebuffed by people because I'm like a dangerous man or something because I'm too tolerant of bad people, I guess. Um, but I was reading his stuff, so I've been and reading Hudson on like monetary theory and the sort of like undergirding in theology. Pretty much everything's actually just about the economy because again, like the whole point of religions is to establish good governments. It's about the relations of things and governing the economy, etc. Like it's all one thing. It's all one thing we're dealing with here, which is like what do we do with all of this? How do we organize all of this that's going on? What's going on? How do we organize this? Um, so I was looking at the pre-Nicene Christians again. I was looking at the Arians, who I never really looked at that much. Arians is in the followers of Arius and some of these other like schismatic or heretical later termed groups by the Orthodox and Catholics, because I think a lot of them are right. I think like I've become more of like a what was it Anomean, which were the people who were opposed to the Trinitarian formula in the Nicene Creed, where they were like emphasizing that there are like there are overlaps in the three persons of the Godhead, but like to ignore their differences and their distinctions is to do violence to the meaning of the Scripture. I think that's absolutely true. Like like these are like people who are like refused to the baptismal formula of like dipping three times. This one guy, he was called the atheist by everyone else. His name was Atheist. But most of the time, if you look at the class background of these like heretics and things like this, these are like the people who came from like working class areas and like were self educated. So like Atheist was like he was like a gilder. Like he worked with like metals. Like he was like in the Ford in like the foundry and like the forge, and then like he became respected in his vocation, and then went into like the schools of logic and like of the Christians and things like this, and became very devoted to like these arguments. And he was like he had a bunch of followers. He had a bunch of followers, but he was then he started getting into debates with like these like younger sons of the Roman aristocracy who also go into the church, and they all fucking try to kill him. They like they burned all of his books and all of his followers' books. Like they literally would make these laws to like make these types of people shut up. Like people who like I see myself in. I'm like that would have been me. Like I would have been the one getting my shit burned. Like they would have been burned my books. And that's just what it's like in history is these if you're not in a credentialed authority, you don't have a good network amongst the eunuch courtesans of the NGO sphere, then they're gonna burn your damn books, man. They're gonna they're gonna call you a heretic. They're gonna name. I think there's that. Do you guys see that article they put out about Haas where they're like talking about like Fox News Maoists or something like this? Like they come up, they'll come. They like they still there's still this whole process of creating the name of a heresy, or even naming it after like a specific person or whatever. Completely misunderstanding what these people were writing in the first place, creating this total caricature of what it is, and then it's like you can imagine in the future that there'll be these like there still are like people talk about Browderism and all these other various these they come up there's all these like heresies in the left that are of schismatics, Larouchianism, etc. And it's always from people who have never taken the time to actually understand the figures that they're actually talking about. They create like a complete caricature of it, and this is true in Christian metaphysics as well, in Christian hermeneutics. Like what you would read if you were to read the theological against heresies, etc. All of these books and encyclopedias that were compiled by the later church fathers, the post-Nicene fathers, etc. Over all of these, over like what do the Donatists believe? What do these people believe? What did Pelagius believe? They never actually correctly describe the heresies that they call heresies. They never accurately describe them because we have over time recovered a lot of these older texts. So if you look at like what atheist was actually saying versus people are like, oh, they're saying he's an atheist. And it's like, no, he's not saying he's not an atheist. He's just saying that God is nothing, is not a thing. It's just like apophatic theology, basically. And he's like, and Jesus, the Son, is not the same. It's not consubstantial. Is not the same. You say this, and Catholics and Orthodox, like the Ortho trad bros, will literally blow up on you to this day if you repeat like this ancient fucking heresy from 2,000 years ago that the persons in the Trinity are distinct entities that are different and they are not the same. They will lose their minds. They'll lose their minds. They don't know why. They've been programmed to lose their minds in this way. But this is true of like the dogmas of all of these little churches. They always have like a list. It's mostly important to know what the heresies are and to accuse each other of heresy. So it's like, oh, that's Arianism. Oh, that's Pelagianism. Oh, that's Donatism. Oh, it's heretical. The Protestants are just heretics, etc., etc. It's crazy. People can't just like be open. Like I like what Origen said. Origenism, also a later heresy. Origen, one of the fucking greatest church fathers, who was like the most erudite man of his time, studied in Alexandria, Antioch. He knew everything. He was like still to this day like one of the great minds in all of human history is Origen. And he later became a heretic. Like the later church would call him a heretic. Like after him being a saint and being like one of the most important church fathers, they later they later just tarnished his whole works. All of his works were anathematized like centuries after his death, because of how powerful the stuff he was saying. But he was saying, which it's they make it seem like he's this mystic and like just like kind of vague or whatever, but he's actually like democratic and concrete in the way Whitman would describe it. Because he said like a good Christian is one who engages with all of the sects, all of the heresies, all of the various religions, and then just tries to adhere to the best of all of them. That's it. Like it's not like oh, it's the one who's the most dogmatically following this particular school. It's like no, it's the one who's engaged the most with all of it. That's what you want to do. Like, and that would be a perpetual process. That's how Origen looked at it. But if you said that now, like, imagine telling a Catholic, it's like, well, have you read like all the Jehovah's Witness stuff? Have you read like the Mormon Bible and all these other things? Like, you should really engage with all of it, right?
or like what? Or what do you do? Like, or you talk to a Marxist, and you're like, oh well, did you read you read Veblen? And like, oh no, Veblen is a Veblen diverted from the true path of the blah blah blah. Where it's like, oh okay, you like Lenin, okay. What do you think about Mao? Oh no, Mao was a revisionist, blah blah blah. Okay, you like Mao. What do you think about Deng Xiaoping? Oh, Deng Xiaoping was a revisionist. He took the capitalist road. Like people have these prohibitions that they lay down, and that is what ultimately they worship, or these prohibitions that they've created for themselves. You should really not be. You should really be capable of like reading and incorporating all of these various things, especially the ones that most disagree with you. I think that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to like, oh no, wait, I'm admitting to the great heresy, red brownism, right leftism, Nazbolism. Whereas like I try to read like people from all over the perspective. I try to like read like arc capitalists, and I try to read arc communists, and I try to read anarchists. Try to read all of the different things because I'm trying to create an ensemble, a kind of holistic view of all of these things and how all of these things work together and how all of these different tendencies could still be maintained, because not everyone is going to be the same type of person. A lot of people are drawn towards these extremes by kind of temperamental differences. Like someone who is like from and you really realize how much of these temperaments are like innate when you deal with children, and you see just how distinct a child's personality is from the beginning, like from the very beginning. Like they're just innately different. They're themselves, and they're gonna pursue their own self, um, wherever that goes. And it's not, there's no uniformal human personality. There's there's distinct like types of diversity. And the more you try to like maintain, and that's what's really concrete. What's completely abstract and vacuous and vague and just like steam and vapor is this notion of like the uniform person. Like this is what the good person is. It's one type of person, and he does this and that. That's not true at all. Like a good person is the person who's most themselves, like who's like pursuing like their own self-development, etc. And everyone's pursuing their own self-development, and that's like what we have to do. Like we can't like there's no there doesn't have to be a fight between the development of the universe in the sense of everything, in the sense of everyone, in the sense of the nation, in the sense of the collective, in the sense of the many, and the development of the one or the individual. That like people create this dichotomy between individualism and socialism or communism or anything like that, and they'll be like, "Well, I'm like an individualist," and it's like, well, okay, fine. Or it's like people are like, I'm an anti-individualist. I don't think anything. But you have to have both. They're both required. They're both necessary. The whole point of having communism is so people can develop themselves. Like it's ultimately an individualistic goal here, is that you want communism so that everyone can develop themselves individually as individuals, even. And that's the whole point. Like a society is a society composed of individuals. Whitman says this himself. I already read that for you all, but I got Matthew here. What's up, Matthew? Howdy.
Oh shoot. Okay. So I'm usually not good on the spot, but and like probably a couple hours from now I'll be like, "Oh, I should have said this to Logo." But I'm going to try my best to help you fill the space. Um so I had listened to the Thorin query that you were on a couple times.
Yeah, the new
Um
one. I think that's one of the best. I think that's the best interview I've ever had. Was the not the first one, but the second one. The first one was good, but the second one, it was like we got to really talk about good stuff. Thorne's a really good interviewer, and he's been reading me, and he's like knows about this circle a lot. It's kind of funny because you see like his posts on Twitter are all just about like esports, like CS:GO stuff, and I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about any of it. But he's a good guy. So, what do you think of that interview?
I thought it was really interesting. I liked how he was willing to go with you towards like to talk about like what I think is one of your main philosophical thrusts about kind of like how like truth is like poetry. And I was really impressed with his willingness to not just like shut down and go there with you and explore it. I thought it was a really good episode, and you guys brought up McLuhan, in that episode. And of course, like for years I've heard about McLuhan, of course. Like it's hard not to hear about McLuhan, but you guys really inspired me to go and start like listening to the audiobooks, digging up the interviews and stuff like that. And
Oh yeah, dude. I
I
spent
found
years
him
doing that.
fascinating.
I spent years doing that when I was like in college. Man, I was like 18 or 19 when I first started getting really into Marshall McLuhan. And I got to the point like I know like some of like the big like McLuhan scholars. There's like whole different like it's funny because like McLuhan was such a big figure that he sort of like created like these warring segments of like people who call themselves media ecologists now. Like the whole field of media ecology is just Marshall McLuhan scholarship. And there's like different wings of it. So then it's like you can go like read like the four different wings of like them. There's like pointsman, and there's a we Compot and I did one where like with this other guy who leads his own media ecology research team, but they all split on like these different lines. You know, you'll have like literally like the Protestant media ecologists and like the Catholic media ecologists like completely opposed to each other. It's very funny, but McLuhan's great. He's one of the he's like one of the great like in the 20th century. I'm always like Northrop Frye, Marshall McLuhan. They were like almost neighbors. They were both interested in the same things, and they came at them at like completely different angles. They almost taught a class together on Finnegan's Wake, but they couldn't. They literally couldn't decide how to run the class because Marshall McLuhan, of course, being like the one who's trying to ride the wave of the moment, was like, let's do like just a big round table. We won't even have lectures. We'll just have everyone sitting in a circle and we'll just like fucking vibe, you know? And then Northrop Frye's like very much like the Protestant. He's like, no, like we have to have like formal lectures. Like we have to plan this out. Like,
It, it's interesting because I think this hits on like this kind of fracturing over McLuhan, but also like very much a fracturing we see in political spaces and fracturing we see in all types of different organizational like it is I think this kind of goes towards like and I feel like you've been making this point implicitly if not explicitly for a long time that it's like it's all hermeneutics, right? It's
yeah,
all how do you read it.
exactly. Yeah, hermeneutics is literally everything. Man, Russell Brand was defining the word hermeneutics to Bill Maher on his podcast, and I was like cackling to myself because I was like, "This is my shtick. He's taking my shtick." But like hermeneutics is like everyone makes fun of me for using that word, but like Bill Maher was like, "Who is this hermeneutics that you keep talking about?" Little Bill Maher style joke on the word hermeneutics, but it really is that. It all comes down to interpretation. It all comes down to how people read and interpret things, and because that can be applied to literally everything. You know, like think about we have these like do you remember the dress when people couldn't determine whether what color the dress was on social media?
Yeah, the
We have
meme. Yeah.
like that's like the archetypal like hermeneutical like problem is you'll have like the like every time there's like a huge hubbub on social media about anything, and like I produced a few of these myself where it's like people will just read like it'll be the same thing and people read it completely different ways, and they can't come to an agreement as to what the thing actually is. It's crazy. But what ultimately it's like that what bears out is just time. Like over time, it's just like inevitably like the one side of the debate here becomes undeniably true. The problem then is like with stuff like Christian hermeneutics, where it's like there actually is no ultimate way. People are like, "How do I know?" Someone asked me this, so I'll address this now. Someone was like, "How do I know who to trust in the Bible? Or like which parts of it are like divinely inspired or whatever?" And it's like, well, you'll figure it out in the end. Like none of
Yeah.
us actually know for 100% sure. It's not that type of thing. It's like if you look at the Book of Revelations, it's like, okay, well, who is this figure referred to, or what does it all mean? It's like we'll know when at the end of time, you know, like it'll
Right.
never be concluded by our
Right. And
rational
I,
disputations.
it's really interesting too because I kind of think like this goes into what you were kind of saying before as well that like but like I because I've been thinking lately I've been meditating on uh I forgive me I don't remember the exact chapter or verse but where you know Jesus is telling the disciples like who is the most blessed in the kingdom of heaven, and then he like picks out a child and he's like you know surely you must become as a child. I think that's and I think that kind of speaks to like what you're talking about, where it's like heterodoxy is so important. It's like, well, like you have to approach, like that's what it means to be like in good faith, is like coming to every text like a student, and
Yeah.
really trying to learn from it.
Yeah. It requires humility. Like children have the most humility. Like there's tons of passages in the Bible about how like to find wisdom, to like pursue knowledge, or to pursue like knowledge and wisdom from the scriptures or from anything really. You have to come at it like a baby going for milk, you know? Like mouth wide open like blah. My baby does this all the time. Like you have to be eager for it. You have to be yearning for it. You have to have a desire for it. You have to be open to it, and to be humiliated. It's like a humiliating thing. Like you have to be humble. You can't come at it with pride. Like, and that's where everyone goes wrong, is they come at things in their pride instead of in their humility. You know, they'll like read even like other people's things. You know, like if you're not engaging with, like if you don't believe that someone else can teach you something, um, then you shouldn't engage with them. Like you shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm gonna like dominate you by like by saying what you actually mean or whatever the fuck. Like that doesn't do anything. You have to if you're gonna like I mean I have the reverse problem where people come into my mentions and they're like trying to teach me things, and I'm like, no, like I'm like, if I want to learn something from you, I will approach you in humility and ask you a question about it. But like you you're here to approach me in humility. You know what I mean? It's like when like when I have people on here who are like trying to like own me or whatever on my own space, and I'm just like, this isn't the zone for that. Like you can go do that. Go make your YouTube video essay about why I'm wrong and stupid, and you can do that elsewhere. But like in this area, like you have to be humble, because I'm in charge here. Like I'm
Right.
trying to be humble with other people, or like if someone seems interesting, I'll try to ask them questions, or if I feel like there's something to
Yes.
teach me. But you can see the pride in people sometimes, and you don't have to put up with that either. You don't have to, that's not what humiliating doesn't mean. That like when some fucking bad faith like bully or something comes in and is just trying to like kick you around, it doesn't mean like just like be like turning into a puddle. You're supposed to stand firm. Like that's what one thing people misunderstand about turning the other cheek. It's about showing that like what they do can't hurt you, in the sense like, oh, you slap me here, like slap me here too. Like it doesn't fucking phase me. That's what it means to turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean to like melt and be nothing, be a clod of clay.
Yeah. I think I've because I've caught myself saying to myself about personal situations that have happened recently, is that speaking to this like,
I lost you there, bud. I lost you there, Matthew. We've lost your audio. I can't hear you. I'll give you like 5 seconds, but I'm gonna have to move on if your audio's dead, because we got other people. I got this. I can do rolls now. Like I could do that for like 4 hours straight. It's very satisfying. Highly recommend learning finger picking guitar. It's way harder than all of the stuff that people do. Like, if you see like those like math rock guitar guys, etc., they're fucking cheating. I can tell you. I can see through all of the smoke and mirrors of guitar players these days, because they just do like these alternate tunings where you can just like play open chords and stuff, and they're just like doing these little tricks, just doing these very simple things. But the hardest thing in the world to do on guitar is like classical style and finger picking style guitar, where you use all of your damn fingers and you pluck the strings with your damn fingers, not with a pick. But it takes a lot of practice. It's literally taken me like, I think I've been doing this like every day for like 6 months now, and now I'm pretty damn good at it. So, all right, I got I think an Irish friend here, Patroig. I'll fuck that up. I don't know Gaelic. I should have learned Gaelic. Could have studied it in school. I almost did, but that would have been even more worthless than what I studied. But ultimately, I'd probably be in the same place. I could have studied Gaelic. That would have been cool.
Oh, it's a wonderful language. Oh, it.
I would want to learn Welsh. That's the thing that I think is like I would like if I were to learn another language right now, it'd be Welsh because like I need to get into the deep on the Welsh chronicles that are still like locked up in the like secret Welsh libraries.
Oh yeah, no, I'm also learning Cornish at the moment, just because I want to be cool and hipster like that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think I'm like descent like I have a side of my family that's from Cornwall. So
That's cool. That's cool. No, Gaelic. I mean, I'm learning it just as a heritage language because my family came from like the way, way south of Ireland, and so I kind of view it as a
yeah,
little bit of a duty to learn it, especially because it's in such a fragile state at the moment.
yeah. I mean, it would be so cool to have a. I mean, they tried to do the whole Gaelic revival. You know, I don't know. We could go off on Irish stuff, but what do you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about Finnegan's Wake for the most part.
All right, cool. What do
Yeah.
you want to? What about it?
In your last stream, I sent a comment talking about how I'm not gonna like listen to anyone's reviews or analysis of it and just kind of dive in just myself and then kind of piece it
Yeah,
together. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It is the most fun I've ever had reading a book, but I'm
it's
having
super fun.
it is. I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out what's going on.
Yeah. Well, that's why you're gonna end up reading secondary literature on
Yeah.
it. It's like he wrote it for it to be like this like it's like a pipe bomb. You know what I mean? Like when he wrote that, he's like compressing all of this stuff into like this little tiny package. If you really think about it, like how much is in it and like how long he spent working on it. And the
Okay.
whole point was to like throw it out into like the literary world and have it like blow up and like all these like you have to like reconstruct the whole history of the world with after this book now, and you have all these like scholars being like, oh, and there's this in it and there's this in it, and like, oh, okay, to like make sense of it you have to, it's a provocation. It really is like an Irish car bomb, I would say. It's like a terroristic act of James Joyce. He was much like the IRA in that manner. It's a terroristic act upon the English literary tradition, this book, because to understand what's going on in it, you have to know the history, the entire history of the British Isles, from prehistorical times, and it goes against entirely the prevailing narrative of the history of the British Isles. So that's why it's so that's why you need so many like secondary sources on it to read, because it's like it's about a lot of it, like, you know, it's about like the relation, it's about colonial, it's about empire and the British Empire, and like the relation between these like invaders and like the people who defend the hegemony, and then like the people on the other side, like the battle of like Shem and Sean. There's Shem the penman, who's also, and then there's Sean, who's the policeman. And these are like the two brothers in who are fighting each other. And then there's also like, you know, the ironic marriage between the like Nordic Scandinavian HCE, Here Comes Everybody, Humphrey Shipton Earwicker, and his wife, who's like the very Gaelic, like Western, like Anna Livia Pluribel, etc., who represent, and it's that's like the mother and father, the parentage of the peoples of the British Empire, are um, these two completely different things, these like opposites, of like the culture of the North and the culture of the West. Um, so it goes all the way back to like, you know, you gotta like know about like the hills of Tara and like the ceremony, like the way that the four counties of Ireland were governed, and like St. Patrick, and you have to go back to, there's a bunch of stuff about ancient Egypt, but at the same time it's using this conflict, the conflict in the British Isles, to represent the conflict of all of world history. So you've got like Wellington and Napoleon, etc., all of the 19th century conflicts, on top of it. It's all put on top of each other in every single layer. It's going after, it's making allusions to across millennia. So to keep it all in your head is impossible, which is why you end up having to read a bunch of the secondary literature, because you couldn't get all of it. Like it's impossible for any one person just like to find that book and already be prepared to read and understand all of it. The only person who could do that was James Joyce. He was the only person
in the entire world who could do that. Not even like Samuel Beckett or the people who are like working on it were as privy to all of these things, because James Joyce's taste in literature, like the things that he read for his own fun, was so multifarious and in so many different languages that there was no one alive at the time who compared to his scope of references. So you really do have to humble yourself, and you're going to have to read secondary literature on that, I'm afraid,
That's
to
a
really
shame.
get it. I would recommend.
I mean, I
There's
was
a
at a
lot of
point
good
where
secondary literature.
yeah, I was at a point where I was able to kind of see. I haven't even gotten to like a meta narrative about like colonialism or anything like that. Really, it's like I'm still trying to put together a narrative where I'm getting these like beautiful landscapes. You know, like there are points where he's talking about like volcanoes in India, kind of about the like the in the first quarter of
Yeah,
the book or stuff like that, or like who were the two characters? It was the Ute and the Saxon. They had a
yeah.
dialogue. I can see like where they're sitting and like reading their dialogue, but putting together an actual story so far has been really difficult, especially when I can't tell what proper nouns are actual characters and who's talking.
Well, it's
Uh,
really like it's about Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, the father figure, and he's like having a dark night of the soul. He's having he's like haunted by his nightmares. It's mostly like if you read Night Town, like in Ulysses, that whole section where it's like this amorphous like scene of um and like projections of internal fears and paranoias like onto the scene, and like you don't know like what is like really happening or what's just happening like psychologically for the characters, because they're all drunk and there's like crazy stuff going on. But it's like there's like that scene in Finnegan's Wake pretty early on where he's like in his dream he's going through the museum, like the museum, and
yeah,
there's like the guy giving the tour guide. The tour guide is like giving him a tour of what's in the museum, but like it's a tour of history in its entirety. uh, but Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, he's tormented by his fear of being caught for, I think, he has some like sex scandal. I'm trying to remember what it is. There's like the actual like baseline story of it. I actually couldn't tell you right now. I forget, but there's people who've like sussed it out. It wasn't me. I mean, I'm just borrowing what I've heard other people. Like Anthony Burgess, I think, does a pretty good summary of like the like surface text of it, of like just like who are the characters, like what's happening beyond like the what the style is saying. Um, but it's like it's yeah, it's about this family of it's like the mother and the father, and there's the two sons, and then there's the daughter, and it's they come in and out of the story, but it's really all amorphous, and it all bleeds into each other, and it's like a Mobius strip anyway, where it repeats. The end is the beginning, and the beginning is the end. So I don't know. It's you can spend your whole life reading it. I'm not even gonna claim to have like complete erudition on it, and I've been reading it for like almost 10 years.
okay, all right. Well, those are some good pointers then.
Yeah, I would like that Anthony Burgess thing, I think, is like probably the most simple one to like get the surface level. There's like Joseph Campbell's Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake is a pretty standard one. I would say Joyce's Book of the Night, or it's Book of the Dark, I believe. Book of the
You
Night.
suggested that last time.
Yeah,
Book of the
and
Night and then the Kabbalah book as well.
yeah, the Curse of Kabbalah, that one's really good too. But there's a bunch of different ones. I mean, really, to like really get James Joyce stuff, you have to like become a fucking Joycean obsessive, and like, read his correspondences and like letters and biographies and the stuff his brother wrote, and you have to read the things that Joyce read. One little bit that I think is really crazy, and this actually happened inside of the book Finnegan's Wake, but it also happened in reality, which is crazy, which is a bunch of like British Israelites, like people like the Brits who believe that they were the lost tribes of Israel, etc. This like informs a lot of British imperial policy for a long time. Um, they were convinced that the Ark of the Covenant was buried under the hill where the kings of Tara were given their crown, etc. Whatever you invested, and so they went to go dig it up, and there was all that like Yeats, like WB Yeats, like there was a big like Irish, there's a bunch of like Irish opposition to this This is just still before the revolution, so it's like British territory, but they're coming over and like literally like it's like the same thing that like Native Americans feel now, like when archaeologists are going to like they you got like the ancient aliens people or whatever being like going to dig up these things. It's like the same fucking thing, but that actually happened, and that's in the book, and that's like it's about that's like the relation of empire where like the person there's a line in it Bagog he found he was the Gog in the sense that like these like British Israelites they conceive of themselves as they like chosen people of history, but in Joyce's opinion they are chosen in the sense that they represent like Gog and Magog in Revelations, who is like the imperial power that is organizing the whole world for Armageddon. So it's like this giant empire. They conceive of themselves as being like God's chosen people and like the subaltern people or whatever. And then every time they go to like find the evidence for this to be the case, they just discover that they're the exact opposite. Like they were going to go find the Ark of the Covenant under the hills of Tara, but they didn't realize that like perhaps it was actually the Gaelic people, the people of the West, these like Phoenician Irish, who were the ones who were the actual lost tribes of Israel.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I've kind of been forming that opinion over the last couple of weeks here about like the British Civil Wars and like the 11 Years' War, about kind of like how Oliver Cromwell kind of had this idea of republicanism and the English Commonwealth, but when it was put into reality, it kind of turned into its own opposite and kind of
Yeah,
reinforced the British imperial system.
yeah, that's like the irony. That's like that irony itself that you're describing there, and like that I was describing. That's like the main subject, I would say, in some ways, of Finnegan's Wake. Like, there's a lot of people have written about it, like post-colonial literature or whatever, and stuff like that. But it's very ardently an anti-imperial book. Like James Joyce said that he was devoted against to opposing two forces, which was Rome and London, and those are still two forces to this day. That's like, as an American, I might add DC or New York or something to that list.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for the advice.
Yeah. I mean, man, I'll eventually, like, when I'm like, I hope to be like 60 years old and be like, okay, I'm going to do the conclusive thing on Finnegan's Wake now. But I know for a fact that it'll take me a very long time to feel confident about expounding upon all of its meaning because it's so complicated. There's so much in it. like I still have to attain some more competency with it. It's like the only book that's like that, I think. It's like the most important book of the 20th century. It's so much. No one wrote anything after that. No one, like, as much as I like Thomas Pynchon, I like all these other things, no one has written anything as good as Finnegan's Wake since it was written. It's like it's still the watershed of literature, I would say.
Oh yeah, no, it feels like the epitome of the English language to me.
Yeah, and it's like it uses like the fact that English is this bastard tongue that can incorporate all other languages. Where it's like, well, here it is. Like it's this English. It's technically in English, but it incorporates like every language Joyce had any competency to, and even some that he didn't even know that well. Like Joyce was competent, I believe, in Norwegian or Swedish, like one of the some in the Scandinavian languages. He was pretty competent in because he was obsessed with Heinrich Ibsen. I always forget what nationality is he? I forgot. But so it incorporates all of these, but there's like Icelandic in it. He's got like some Japanese in it. He's got like little bits of Chinese that he could gather in it. He's got like Hungarian in it. He's got like these like bits of like African languages that he got from these like ethnological studies and things like that on these other languages. Like he was obsessed with linguistics and like that whole thing, that whole
Yeah,
study with language.
I know he also likes to throw in like little Gaelic grammar bits in there too.
Yeah.
Which I feel like a lot of people don't understand if you don't have like it's very rudimentary. I don't think he was a Gaelic speaker. A lot of the times he actually avoided it quite a bit.
Well, it's because it was really popular. Like he was opposed to. He was like people call people like him a contrarian, but he was pretty. He was a bit of a contrarian. Like it was extremely popular at the time. This is like the Gaelic revivalism, where it became like this national pastime to try to revive the Gaelic language in Ireland, leading up to the revolution, and even afterwards. There were But the great irony of Irish history, right, is that like the Irish Constitution was written in English first because most of the people who did the revolution couldn't speak Gaelic, and then they translated it into Gaelic. And the official, then they were like, oh, they put out the one in Gaelic first and then the translation, even though it was actually produced the opposite way.
That is a huge issue with the language. where it's these non-native speakers creating these kind of nonsense terms just based on their knowledge of English. And so they create these kind of really bastardized terms of like government jargon that don't make any actual sense.
Yeah.
But then they become, Kajanofagul. They become the official standard, and so you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I was only in Ireland for a brief time, but I enjoyed seeing all the signs, like in with the Gaelic under it. It's kind of funny. It's just like, who's this for? Like, it's sort of, I don't know.
For me, dude.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool though. I wish I had learned Gaelic. I might learn it someday in the future, but not anytime soon. But nice talking to you, man.
Yeah, of course. Oh, one last thing.
Oh, yeah, one more thing.
Don't shit on picking too much, because there are some metal heads that have figured out how to do some really crazy shit with your pick. So,
oh, sure. But that would sound like
I've done 17 years of
all of that
classical
stuff.
guitar, and
I'm
so
just saying, all of that stuff would sound like garbage if they didn't have like their effects and distortion, etc. If you did what like metal picking, like the like black metal picking or whatever, these like tremolo picking and things like that. If you do that on just like an acoustic guitar, it's like, okay, all right.
Well, that's not Chet Atkins. He had a what would he call it? He did sweep picking a couple of times.
Yeah.
He called it something else though.
Well,
but
if
it
you're
was
playing a banjo, you're doing a lot of sweep picking.
Yeah. So, no, that's the only other thing.
All right, man. Peace out, man. Nice talking to you.
You as well.
All right. This is probably a bad idea, but I'm going to add Santa Muerte here. I have a feeling this is a bad idea considering his avatar is like a demonic sigil. What's up?
Hi, I wanted to know what was the name of the book again?
Which one?
That he said Finnegan's or
Finnegan's
Finnegan,
Wake.
excuse me?
Finnegan's Wake.
Wig, W-E-G?
Wake. W-A-K-E, like wake.
Ah,
Like
Wick, Wick.
yeah.
Okay. Like in candle. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Finnegan's Wake. It's named after an old Irish drinking song. And the song is about a man. It's about a man named Finnegan who is like, I believe he's like a carpenter, and he falls off of a ladder and he dies. And at his wake, everyone is singing songs in the Irish fashion to him being like to celebrate his life. And they spill some whiskey onto his corpse, and he wakes up and he joins the party. And that's the Joyce's frame of history, is that it's like Finnegan's Wake, where we're all the Finnegans. And he also was like punning a bit on trying to get people to wake up, like it's like a bit of a command. He's saying, Finnegans, wake, like wake up, everyone. This is the real history of the British Isles.
Thank you very much.
For sure. Anything else I can do for you?
Nay, I'm okay. I just love books and I'm always looking for something that's interesting, something new.
Oh yeah,
Not just the
that
same
one
old
will occupy
romance and
you.
so. How, excuse
That one
me?
will occupy you that'll occupy you for the rest of your life. It's like one of the most complicated books ever written. It's really cool.
Finnegan.
Finnegan S.
Egan.
Yeah, it's like an Irish last name.
Oh,
Finnegan.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good one. All right. Anyone else? We're taking requests here. Taking requests. I could just have Mage on. I have Mage on all the time. All right, Mage. I'll add you until we get someone else. How are you doing on this beautiful day? Oh, Mage. As I said that, someone came in.
Hello? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I just want to say hi. Have a.
Yeah, I just went, hello. I read The Right to Be Lazy the other night.
Is that so good? I love Lafargue.
Dude, I love how he's just quoting Rabelais. Like, it's...
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Lafargue is so good. It's so funny because, like, I feel like he's not really that, like, people read The Right to Be Lazy, but he wrote a ton of stuff. And he was like really like he literally married Marx's daughter. You know what I mean? Like he was like he was the closest you could get to the man
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. He's like the adopted son of Karl Marx, and a lot of Marxists don't read him at all or consider like what he has to say to be of any like value or anything. But it's still Lafargue that Marx wrote the quote. Like if those are Marxists, like because Lafargue's like being like, hey, can you believe this shit? Like these other fucking leftists are telling me that I don't understand what the fuck you're talking about and that they're Marxists. And Marx is like, well, if they're Marxists, I'm not a Marxist.
Mm.
I feel that way all the time. Like Marx himself was ashamed of the label Marxist within his own lifetime.
That's so beautiful. It's I don't know. Right to be lazy was so funny. The introduction to the NYRB copy of it is like, oh, I wish I could get this printed in like a small mass market paperback and put it at the checkout line of every grocery store with a man fishing on the cover, which I thought is beautiful.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
That would be so
That's
cool.
how it should be. It's like it's fun. It's so offensive to people though because like there's like it still cuts against the grain of like people being like these damn socialists and communists are just lazy and they don't want to work and that's like that. So then you have these like pro work like that was like what the Larouchians were mad at me for, right? When I was saying like communism is free time. The ultimate the purpose of life is a leisure. God created the world so he could rest, etc.
Yeah.
They're like, no, like work is the valorizing labor, etc. It's like, yeah, you valorize labor because when you're done, you don't have to do it anymore, and that's why it's worth doing, so that you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah, and
That's the
you've
whole
like
point of work.
made something. Like it's not the work that is the good part.
The work is a curse, like that's what God says. He's like, the cursed will be the ground now. Like you're cursed, you have to work now. Adam didn't work. Not neither.
Cain was a farmer. Cain was the first
Yeah,
farmer.
exactly. Cain worked harder. Cain worked harder than Abel, and that's why he hated Abel because God liked Abel more, even though Abel worked less.
It's true. It's literally the argument that he makes in Right to Be Lazy. It's so cute.
I
Uh,
know. It's true
I know.
too. It's true.
Um,
So true.
yeah.
All right, Mage.
All right. All right.
It was nice talking to
I know.
you, but
I
I
know.
got someone in the. I got. I'm working here.
No, I know.
I've got
I
a
wanted to
line of
tell you. I wanted to
customers, and
tell you about the beautiful Japanese discourses I found with these Disney obsessed Japanese people for One Piece.
I'm sure they. I still got to catch up on One Piece, dude. Maybe I'll read more of it. But I literally, I read a bit of it. Like I got past Skypiea, and the shit after that, and now I'm just like, also like I need to like download a torrent of it or something because these like bootleg
They just have
websites of
too many fucking
scans,
ads.
they have too many ads and they keep missing pages. It'll be like, oh, except for this one page won't load because it's lost. And I'm just like, God fucking damn it.
I'll just send you a
So I got to
torrent.
torrent it or something. Yeah, send me a torrent for it all.
Uh,
All right.
all
Peace,
right,
mage.
later, man.
All right. Cranky, Ochiing, whatever your name is. What's up? What can I do for you? Yeah, what's up?
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, I've liked a lot of the space so far. I liked how you opened up. Also have been reading some Bolaño lately, and I found this one anthology of like I think from the '80s of like Latin American poetry and stuff. So like a lot of like but I guess this is all to say like there was uh someone called Enrique what was the Enrique Lin. Do you know him?
I don't think so.
He was like kind of mentioned in. Have you read Distant Star?
I think that's one I haven't read. There's so many. I haven't read every Bolaño novel, but you've read a ton of them. So I haven't read that one, but I've heard good things about that one.
I mean, it's basically just a continuation of like this one's of. Did have you read Nazi literature of the Americas?
Yeah. I've read that
So
one.
do you remember that guy who was like writing poetry as a skywriter? Like
Yeah.
so yeah, that's just like Distant Star is just basically an expansion of that. Like if you read that brief kind of section, you've pretty much read Distant Star.
Oh, okay. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did that with a couple of the figures in there that they like show up in other novels and stuff like that. I don't have the whole Bolaño cinematic universe, the whole Bolaño wiki page where of all the like crossovers, but I know he did
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Like I guess like the big one was Arcambaldi, or however you say his
Yeah,
name, but he makes an appearance, and no, he does. Or like the guy, like in that kind of scene where they all crucify in like the last section of 2666. Uh, he's mentioned in Nazi literature of the Americas. Like, and I think that incident
yeah,
too is also mentioned. Uh,
yeah.
uh,
It's so crazy, dude. Bolaño is so good.
yeah.
Bolaño is like I'm gonna be reading Bolaño novels till I die, probably, because I every time I read them, I'm just like, this is great. Like I got the last one I read of his. I haven't read a new one or like another one,
Hmm.
in maybe like 2 years.
Hmm.
The last one I read was Little Lumpen Novelita,
Oh yeah, yeah. I
and that
heard
was
that one.
great.
I like read. I think I read that one. I'm
And
not.
then I have the Spirit of Science
Oh
Fiction,
yeah, yeah,
that one.
yeah, yeah. He mentions the Gene Wolfe in that one,
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's why I got it.
and then he talks about Bob Dylan after, or
I know, dude. It's like literally me. Like that's me. Bolaño. I was like this is it was kind of a funny thing in college. Like we had like a lot of my friends, like a lot of people I made friends with immediately. It was just like we just vibed over like being obsessed with the same things. One of those things being like Bolaño. I feel like there's just like these little like he's like one of those figures where it's like if I see someone reading Bolaño or like fucks with Bolaño, I know that they're like we're gonna be friends.
you should when you and like Sawyer do the like One Piece podcast or sorry, not sorry, Mage, you and Mage. I mixed it up. Sorry. If you guys do like the One Piece podcast, you have to do like a reference to the scholars in 2666.
Yeah, oh man. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that when I finally
or
finish One Piece.
or the
I'll probably finish it when it's finished. I'll probably be done with One Piece when Oda's done with it.
the visceral
That's the
reader.
rate I've been reading it.
No,
Visceral realism.
the visceral readers, or the
Yeah.
visceral yeah. Uh, but there was like I guess I was talking to my friend, and well, like I was like kind of like I usually don't like send him like sections of poetry or anything like that, but then you talking about you, and then I sent him like a poem Enrica Lynn wrote, and like when I was like saying, like when I was mentioning Distant Star earlier, I think he's like mentioned in it. I don't know if I've gotten to that part in Distant Star where he's mentioned where he says Chilean poetry will never change until Enrica Lynn is properly read. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
Let me see if I can
I
find
gotta
it.
get into that. I gotta get into more Latin American literature. I've always loved Latin American literature. Like, I mean, I've read everything Borges ever wrote.
Hmm.
Borges was like my favorite for a long time. Um, Cortázar. I like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Um, I like Neruda. I don't know. There's so much good on that. And I've been trying to get more into the like Latin American like folk music tradition, I guess too, because I feel like I don't know. I'm like devoted to America, the big America. I think that we're gonna all come together at some point under like a super America, and that'd be great. I
Uh,
think.
have you read Nicanor Para? I think that's how you say Nicanor Para. I always uh,
I don't think so. You probably know more than me if you have that like I haven't read a compilation of like a bunch of them or anything. I didn't do a survey.
well
So you probably know more than I do.
he's like the big one to pay attention. He's like the big he's like because you mentioned Cortez. I think Para biggest influences are Para, Borges, and Cortazar. Uh, all names
Yeah,
I'm probably butchering, but
it's
it,
fine.
it,
I am too. Us
Para.
gringos.
Well, I'm yeah. I guess I kind of count as a gringo. I'm originally well I was like when I was younger I lived in Kenya then immigrated to the U.S. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So sort of.
Yeah, pseudo gringo.
Pseudo gringo.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, gringo is a gringo. Well, yeah. Well, it doesn't like the term. I think comes from they saw American soldiers and they'd say, "Look at gringo, gringo." Uh, but Para, he was he called himself an anti-poet. He was like a physicist. I think he died after Bologna.
Interesting. I do like people
Uh,
who are in a field and they come describe themselves as anti. Like my favorite philosophers are the anti-philosophers. I like anti-artists too, like the artists who like hate art.
yeah, like yeah, like that brings to mind like how Vincent Gallo, he'll never like he says I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. or
Yeah,
Ozu. Yeah, he didn't identify as that, but Kijo Yoshida wrote a book called Ozu's Anti-Cinema, where he's kind of Tokyo Story. People kind of bought into the melodrama of it, so then it's almost the rest of his filmography is just penance for how people are easily deceived by images.
yeah.
Uh,
Or it's
uh,
like Miyazaki being the anti-anime anime guy.
yeah, it's nothing but trash.
Yeah, I like that. I like those guys. Anyway, man, it's been nice talking to you about
Yeah, cool.
some Latin American literature. You gave me some good recs. I got to read more Bologna and more of those guys too.
Yeah. And have you read Clarice Lispector?
No, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a big one, like Passion of GH. That's like the other big Latin American uh, one people really like hang on to, like
Yeah,
Passion according to GH and Agua Via.
I'll check those out, man. All right, nice
Yeah,
talking to
cool.
you, man.
All right,
Peace.
peace.
All right, we got loading Hardcat beats. Hardcat beats. Boots and cats. Beats and cats. What can I do for you? You there? All right. Well, gotta remove you. Edward James. What can I do for you?
Oh, hello.
What's up,
Hey,
man?
what's up, Logo? I didn't know you knew how to play.
Yeah, I've been playing guitar since I was a kid, but I've only really seriously applied myself to it recently. Like I know like chords and like basic stuff, but I never really got good at it because I just wanted to like originally when I was like a teenager, I was like, I just want to be able to play the songs that I already know. And so I can get girls. That was really my whole inspiration for it. And it's only been recently that I've been like using it as a means to express like my own, the songs that I want to make myself. So that's why I've put more into it. But I definitely been enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, getting into finger picking and stuff really does that to you. Once you figure out how to like have like independent finger movement, like
Yes.
you expand
Yeah,
from
it
there.
opens up everything. And then like I don't know, I just like I don't really know that much music theory, but if I like make a chord, like I just fuck around until I find something I like the sound of and then I try to figure out why it works later. By looking up like the chord just and like how like what type of progressions it was or whatever. But I've been enjoying it. It's really nice. It's really meditative for me. Like I'll just sit there and like finger pick for like 2 hours.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Well, I kind of wanted to ask you a question relating to China, since I
For
think
sure.
that a strong suit of yours. So, I was like looking at some statistics, and apparently the majority of Chinese millennials own property.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of looking into that, and I saw a lot of people on the internet. Like, I think I saw like an article from the Washington Post or on Bloomberg where they were talking about it, and the explanation was that there's like some sort of social pressure. There's like some sort of social pressure that Chinese millennials have to buy property. So what they'll do is that they'll, like, if they don't have the means, and they'll get their family into some sort of like generational debt so that they could buy homes prematurely or something. So I kind of wanted to hear you weigh in on that, because I would like to know.
Well, that's like, every time you read like Western coverage on the Chinese economy or how these things are doing, they're trying to portray things in like the least charitable light possible. In the same way where they talk about like, oh, China is building ports in Africa and they're building trains and they're building all these things, but they're just putting, it's called trap diplomacy. They're just putting them in a debt trap or whatever. And that's sort of the same thing they're saying here too, right? Where they're saying like, oh, the Chinese are, well, sure, they own all this property, but they actually have a debt problem. And it's like there's constant writing about the Chinese debt problem as if it's anything compared to the American debt problem. Like we have the same problem here. Like you have this type of debt for most, like think about it being a millennial and trying to buy property right now. Like that's like me. Like, so I don't have to think about it. I just live it. Um, the property values, like I can't afford to live up here in the Northeast at all because you can buy like a fucking shitty house anywhere is going to be like $300,000, like is at like base almost. So and that's a fuck ton of money. And also like if you look at interest rates and things like that, you're taking on, if you go into a mortgage, you're taking on a ton of debt. Pretty much everyone, that's the case. I know people who are like buying houses right now and they're going into that, and unless even like people who are like good jobs, like higher level of the economy can't afford it. Like I know people who are like Ivy League, post grad, Ivy League, business school people who can't afford property in like the cities that they work in. That's just how like we have way more of a debt problem in that sense because we're trying to extract all of the possible fucking value from these things. Whereas in China, they might be going into debt, but it's nowhere near the type of debt that we have. Like their debt still probably be able to pay off, and if not, they still have a banking system which is controlled by the state treasury, such that if there's like a massive like debt crisis in the way that we had a debt crisis in like 2008 when it came to mortgages, they could just write it off, and they would write it off at the expense of the bank and not the other way around. Because what we did in 2008, what Obama did was he made all the banks whole, but he did not write off the debts of the people who had to pay them. So then all these people just got foreclosed upon, and it was massive fucking. I mean, the effects of that are still ongoing. So I don't know. You can't really trust Bloomberg or the Financial Times or any of these people to report in a charitable fashion on the Chinese economy. They also just aren't that equipped to understand how the Chinese economy works because most of the time these people are writing and they don't know Mandarin or anything. They're just repeating like these sort of reports that are made by other people who are also should be brought into question as to how much competency they have to understand what's going on in China. You have like, Financial Times reporters writing about the Chinese economy who've never been to China, stuff like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, I knew that you would have a more objective take on it. Like, I know that there's this westernized sort of interpretation of Chinese affairs that is always kind of like representing them in the least charitable light possible. But yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for.
Yeah, they just keep predicting like doom. Like, you can see those like YouTube channels that have been saying like the Chinese economy is going to collapse today, and they've been making the exact same video for like 5 years. Like, like that's like, and it's like, and then it's like you look around in America, and it's like, well, isn't our economy the one that's failing right now? And it's like, no, dude, we're actually much stronger than it seems. That's the real propaganda, is thinking that there's massive de-dollarization happening, but actually we're better off. And we got Peter Zahan here to talk about population curves and why actually the Chinese are the most doomed for the future, whereas we are going to be great. Like, there's a whole industry around, like, especially anything that would be considered like good news. Like, you take that statistic, right, where it's like, if you go around to anyone, a millennial in the West, and you're like, hey, did you know that in China, 70% of people in your generation, like your age, own property? Do you own property? And they're like, no, I don't own any fucking property. And it's like, what, really, the Chinese own that? But I thought they were communists and no one owned anything. It's like, well, that's not really what communism means, that's kind of so they have to have this whole industry to recast any of these sort of talking points. There's obviously a ton of money being put into making China seem as bad as fucking possible.
Yeah. I was having a discussion with a friend about the whole like Chinese millennial property ownership and stuff like that, and he tried like
He goes into
BTSing
Google,
me.
he types Chinese property ownership, goes to the
Literally.
Bloomberg, and then it's like, well, this is what the Bloomberg reporter says. And then you go like, well, you trust fucking Bloomberg? And they're like,
Didn't even
yeah.
say that. He didn't even say that he got it from Bloomberg, but after the discussion I went and I did that. I Googled it and I read like the most relevant articles on the topic, and it was like verbatim what he was telling me. And it was just like this huge BTFO moment, and I was kind of triggered, not gonna lie, because like I'm
Well,
pretty bullish on China too. So
well, that's a thing, right? Well, you have to think about it, right? It's like we already know this is how people do anything, right? Where it's like you could do this with literally anyone. They're just going to Google the first, like the keywords of whatever claim you're making, and then they're going to go look at the things in the top results on that, and then they're going to take those as authoritative, and then they're just going to repeat it back to you. So you're just talking to like the Google algorithm. You're not talking, you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that's and you basically have to, if you're talking to someone who has faith in like the Google algorithm giving them like the truth from their keyword searches, like that the top results are going to be the authoritative thing, then like ultimately what, like they don't have a stance in the real sense. Like they're just looking to adopt what they think is like the authoritative consensus. And if you're just looking to adopt the authoritative consensus, you definitely can't be looking for the truth, right? Like those are completely different things.
Yeah, many such cases. I guess
Like
like
there's Chinese YouTube, there's like other people who are more adept at this stuff than me in the particulars, and I take their word for it. Like there's a Cyrus Jansen, I believe his name is, on YouTube. He like lived in China for like 12 years and he does a lot of this stuff. But Michael Hudson, other people like this, you can go like, I don't know. There's like you have to be capable of being charitable to these other sources, because I guarantee you, right? Like let's say that you knew that this guy was going to go get this Bloomberg article, and then you had a Chinese media source that was portraying it differently. They'd go, yeah, but that's Chinese media. You can't trust that. You know what I mean? But like they don't apply that same skepticism to Western media because they believe in the fiction that like the Western media establishment is somehow like independent of the hegemony of the economy, like as if the Financial Times reporter is like this objective third party on things.
yeah,
Like
that's why
that's
like
the mythology. That's like the real founding thing, that if you still believe that like the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or any of these like authoritative outlets, or like a think tank, like an international think tank, blah blah blah, if you still trust the authority of these things, then it's like, that's ultimately your politics.
yeah, well said. Since you brought up Michael Hudson, I'd like to ask you about something that he said. I was like watching a video that I think you recommended, like you had just posted it. I can't remember which one it was, but in the video he's talking about how debt, like incurring debt, can artificially increase the GDP of the economy.
Yeah.
So I kind of like don't really understand how that works.
Well, so it all comes down to like, what is the GDP, right? And the GDP is pretty much a bogus metric. Like, what is it? Because it all comes down to what is defined as goods that are produced. So, for instance, the example Michael Hudson always gives is that what we call financial services are considered goods. So, let's say you got charged an overdraft fee on your bank account. That is considered a good that was produced. That fee is added to the GDP. Think about that. Where does like what good was produced there? There's nothing that was actually produced whatsoever. But that would go under like when the bank is talking about its income from financial services. One of those services is charging overdraft fees. So then when we're talking about like our GDP, it's like, what are we really talking about? We're just talking about like this addition of a lot of fictitious goods, like an overdraft fee, which is literally just like, you know what I mean, or like rents and things like that, as if they're the same thing as someone growing a banana and selling it. they're treated the same way by the statistics. So that's like we have like it's a if you read J is for Junk Economics by Michael Hudson, he'll explain all of this about basically like even the metrics we're using to describe the economy are like ideologically captured to produce like a false picture of how the economy actually is. Because we'll be like, oh look, the GDP is growing, and it's like, is the GDP growing, or is or like in a real sense, in the sense that there are more goods that are produced, and they go, well, what's a good? You know, like what is a good? Like, you know, aren't financial services a good? Or it's like, or when they raise tuition at colleges, like they make college cost more, they make healthcare cost more, they raise these fees, these kind of rentier fees. They count those as goods that are produced, even though they're not produced. They're services. So that's like, so then you have like people who try to break down GDP into like real GDP and things like that. There's like, it's a whole fucking farce of economic metrics that are baked into this system, in order to not recognize metaphysically the difference between like tangible actual goods that are produced and services that are provided. This is also why, if you remember, there's a huge fucking multi-year long argument over whether or not baristas are are
Yeah, I remember that.
producing surplus value, because they're not, because their work isn't actually producing a good. They are charging money for a service that is rendered, and
Yeah.
this
Didn't you
distinction
have
is
a
not
disagreement
recognized
with like
metaphysically.
didn't you have like a disagreement with Cantbot about that?
Yeah, I mean, Compat is less interested. Like he's not as interested in the like he studied economics, but he's been more interested in things like library science, whereas I've become more and more interested in political economy. So he is saying, like, he is kind of following a line. I disagree with him on this. He's kind of following a line saying that, like, at this point of financialization, uh, it's impossible to, like, all of these things are kind of conflated together, where it's like, okay, well, these are all working class people because they're not at the high, they're not, you know, bankers or whatever. But then if you really press on this sort of thing, you go, okay, well, the person who's working as an investment banker who gets a salary, etc., or the clerk at a bank, are these people productive laborers? And they'll say yes. And they'll say this to literally every single thing. And then it becomes impossible to actually make class distinctions based on their relation to the means of production. And that's partially because the way our economy has been set up, and the way that we govern the economy is to conflate all of these classes. Like, we don't recognize the existence of these classes as having distinct relations to the means of production. We talk about like income rates, and we talk about you know, things like that. Like, we use terms like the middle class, and it's like, what is the middle class? Like, we use all of these like junk terms, and they've been kind of reified to a degree that, you know, I don't know. It's most people don't want to have this conversation because it's offensive to people, because they're like, well, you know, well, this person's struggling to pay their rent, and you know, they're not having a good time of it. So like, who cares if they're proletarians or not? Like, let them advocate for their own self-interest. And it's like, at no point have I ever said like, oh, I think the police should break up the Starbucks baristas union. My whole point was that the Starbucks baristas union doesn't matter and doesn't affect anything in a real sense, because it's like the same thing as like the Hollywood Producers Guild. Like, you know, it doesn't mean anything. Or it's like a police union. The good police union, you know, there's like a prison guards union, where it's like, if you're going to make this the base of your revolutionary politics or whatever, you're saying like, this is the vanguard of communism in America, is the police guards union and the baristas union and the Lockheed Martin union and the union of investment bankers or whatever. Then it's like, well, then you're just talking about the system we already have. That's how things are governed right now. Like, who supports the Starbucks baristas union? Not the CEO of Starbucks, but a bunch of other CEOs are probably like, they should unionize, whatever. It's for their own self-interest. Everyone can advocate for their own self-interest. But then if you're talking about, let's say, the actual proletarian laborers who actually produce surplus value, well, their unions are like, then that's being turned more and more into independent contractor work. And then we're getting these things conflated backwards. So it's like a truck driver. People be like, well, the truck driver owns his means of production because he has a lease to the truck and he owns the LLC of his independent contracting truck business that he licensed out to blah, blah, blah. So we've created an economic system which makes these class divisions occulted. And so if you try to bring them to the front, to the fore, to say that there are still these classes and that there's a logic, there's a reasonability, there's like a rationality to how they interact, etc., and that the concept of the working class being already nebulous, wherein people say the working class, they usually mean like just not rich people, like just people who aren't what we would describe as wealthy or upper class. But then it's like, well, there's the middle class, upper middle class. It's all very hazy. It doesn't make any real distinctions. And that's how our own economy works. Like, you look at tax brackets, people are mostly talking about tax brackets. And it's like, are tax brackets the same thing as class? In America, people most likely probably think so, where it's like when you're in a different tax bracket, then you're in a different class. But that's not really how it is.
Right on. So you wouldn't consider yourself post-political, would you?
I don't know. I think everything's political in the sense that everything's everything. I'm not a partisan in the sense that I don't feel well, like if I am a partisan, like I guess, people think I'm a Republican and I guess
Do
I
you
side
think
closer to that. But
that like in theory we could well, I guess in theory you would, but is there a future where you see the biggest problems in America being tackled successfully by the democratic process, or do you feel like there has to be
I think it'll
some
be the historical
extreme
process.
measure?
But when you say the democratic process, I don't know what that means here. Like, because to me, the democratic process just means like the working out of history. So it's like because everyone's involved in that anyway,
Like just
right?
voting,
No, I don't.
in this
I don't.
context.
No, well, I mean, there'll be aspects of like voting and things like that. Like, I don't think people are going to stop voting, but I don't think that they're going to work themselves out in that way because like who do you get to vote for? We have these problems that we need to solve that ultimately you can't vote on them to solve. Like for instance, let's say we wanted to like reform campaign financing or whatever, or like lobbyists, etc., such that these massive corporations don't just like control the democratic process. Like how do we have a democratic process that unseats the oligarchic control over the democratic process? Well, you'd have a revolution. So it's like, then is a revolution the same thing as voting? No, not really, because you can't vote for a revolution. It has to be enacted beyond this process, and I think that's how it'll come about. Like, I do think there will be a revolution in America. I'm not going to forecast when, but I don't see the democratic process of being completely owned by oligarchic power and interests. I don't see that just smoothly running along into forever. I think it's falling apart even now, but it's gonna, like, we straight up need, like, how do you change all these laws? Like, there's too much that has to be fixed for it to, and there's too much power opposed to it for it to be done like in this, like, peaceable manner. Because like even if you want to be peaceful about it, we're gonna have all these people trying to be peaceful about it. The people who you're opposed to as a class, this oligarchic interest of the creditors, etc., they're not gonna let you do that peacefully. They'll fucking kill you. So that's really like what it's gonna be like. You'll have people like running for, or like they'll get co-opted like this. It's not that hard to co-opt someone like on like the squad. Like, not very hard to co-opt people like that at all. But the harder people to co-opt are people like the like the MAGA people. They're a lot harder to co-opt because they are dogmatic in a different sense. Um, like, it's really like you can't really co-opt like Ron Paul or like one of these people who's like, no, I think we need to defund all of these things. We need to get rid of all this. I think this is all unconstitutional. They're not looking for like an efficient means to promote their own careers, but they're like trying to be public servants in that way. And that's more and more putting a target on your back So those people are going to be more and more like, look at the domestic terrorism legislation. It's looking for people who are like, give a fuck about the Constitution and civil rights and things like that. So that's really what it's going to come through. It's going to come through the persecution of the people who are like actually in the right. And the more that those people are persecuted, the more people will see the evil of the system and come to support that. And eventually you hit a point where you have a revolution. And we're approaching that point. I don't know how far away we are, but clearly there's a massive defection from faith in the institutions. There's never been a time where less people have faith in the American economy. The majority of Americans are opposed to the government right now. So they have a crisis. They're gonna see how they can manage it. They might be able to pull through in the sense of like building this sort of new petty bourgeois coalition centered around a type of welfare state democratic socialism with a stronger police element in surveilling for what we call domestic insurgencies from radical right-wing patriots and things like this, like people who are like, care about constitutionality of things and stuff like that. That's more and more becoming the enemy, very explicitly, of the state itself. And that's the struggle we're going to go through.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right. I hope that there is like some sort of concrete change that can occur in the future. Ideally not through some sort of violent revolution, but I do feel like there is like at least like the Zoomer generation, except if they're like pro like on some like trans ally shit. I see a lot of like inaction. I feel like the Zoomer generation is crippled by inaction. Someone on here said like that like the Zoomer, like what characterizes a Zoomer generation, and it's just like post ironic detachment. And I just really see that. I mean, I'm a Zoomer myself, and I go to college and stuff, so I see it all around me. It's like people in my peer group think that it's like cringe to care, like it's cringe to be serious or like have serious convictions and shit like that. Like, so it's
Well,
like, how are you gonna
they're
get
kind
shit
of
done?
overcorrecting
How are you gonna
from.
get shit done?
Well, so number one, like we're not inheriting any sort of power in the way that the generations before us did, not even the millennials, because there used to be a possibility of like capital accumulation generationally, but that process is completely since 2008 has just disappeared. So if you look at like let's say the average millennial now is like in their 30s or something like that, right? And you look at like their assets and like their capital accumulation compared to Generation X or the baby boomers at their same age, it's completely night and day. So there used to be this like flow of you see this very obviously where it's like you have people who are like more supportive of what they'd call left-wing policies of like social redistribution of blah blah blah, and then they'd start accumulating capital in the American economy, and they'd have a swing towards the right, in the sense of towards the center of just defending like liberal, the whatever fair and balanced. They'd have that's like how it would go. Like you start off, it's like my grandparents, right? They were like old Democrats, and then they became Republicans as they got older. And you see a lot of people become like more conservative in that sense as they get older. But that's not happening with millennials. It's not going to happen with Zoomers either. You find actually amongst millennials that they tend to get more radicalized because they are not. There's nothing. It's not paying off. You know what I mean? Like there's no reward here. Like let's say let's say you're like a loyal Democrat. You voted for the Democrats over and over, and it's like where's the payoff? Where does it ever mean anything? Where does it ever contribute or change your life in any way? It's not changing anyone's lives. It's not fixing any of the problems that people want to see addressed. So people are becoming more and more jaded generationally, which is why you're saying like, the thing with millennials is that we were like naive. If anything's wrong with the millennials, it's like the naivety of millennials was this notion that like, yes, we're gonna like that the problem was just totally this like the neocons in the sense of like George Bush. Like we grew up under Bush and we're like, oh my God, George Bush, just like Reagan, it's the neocons. These are the problem. We're gonna just like get rid of them and and then everything will be fine. We'll vote. Well, we can elect Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders will just fix everything for us. And like really, it's like towards the tail end of the millennial generation who have like started that Zoomer trend of post-ironic disaffection and cynicism, etc. I mean, that's me. I mean, that's me. Like that's how I felt, because I was a true believer in that sense of being like, oh, like America's being more progressive. When I was younger, I was like, we're gonna get universal health care because we're gonna unseat all these like old reactionary boomers or whatever. And then you start to realize that the left here, the institutionalized left, like the consensus of civic society, is actually just as bad, if not worse. And if anything, they're rehabilitating all of the worst parts of the neocons, while the neocons are simultaneously casting off their like scapegoat evangelicals that have become like the enemy of that of like the millennials as a generation. For the most part, they're like, oh, the real problem is MAGA type people, etc., or it's the real problem is these Christian evangelicals who like aren't tolerant for like, because like think about gay marriage is like in our own lifetimes. I remember like being like, oh yeah, that's fucked up. Like I don't know, I don't really care about gay marriage personally. I don't, it's not like an issue to me. I didn't ever feel strongly about it one way or the other. So when I went through, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It feels weird that people be really opposed to this. But what you're finding now is that like all of that like social progressivism is actually more intolerant in a lot of ways towards dissent than the opposite. So that's where the disaffection is coming from, is the fact that like people are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go vote for the fucking Democrats. But then it's also like the same naivety that pushed like Trump forward is like, oh, that Trump's gonna just solve all the problems. And that's like what sort of the boomers and some of the more conservative Gen Xers who also have this cynicism. Basically, people become cynical against the institutions here, and that's just happening earlier and earlier, because that's all that we're really noticing generationally. Because like you're talking about Zoomers being disaffected, ironic, etc. Millennials are like that too. Gen Xers are like that. Gen Xers invented that. Really, like they didn't, like the most naive people were the boomers. The real like disaffection, cynicism, etc., being like, oh, America is the fucking just an imperial fucking genocide, blah 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 blah. That's really like a Gen X baseline type of understanding. I don't know. Eventually, like if you just have it, so like how young can you possibly become disenchanted with this all? I don't know. I was pretty disenchanted with the American system my entire life, like since I was a child. I can never remember being like, this is how things should be. This is great. Like, wow, things are just getting better. Never felt like that my entire life. So it can't maintain, like you can't actually maintain. That's like it's losing the mandate of heaven. The system is losing the consensus of the governed, the consent of the governed, and it's kind of self-aware of that. I don't think that the powers that be believe that they can like alter that trajectory. So really the question today, and for the changes that are happening now, is how do you govern a society that you don't effectively trust and who considers this government illegitimate? So all of it's this great imperial irony where all of the techniques that we applied to the fringes of our empire are now just being applied domestically. Like it's all coming home. So it's like, how would you govern an Iraqi, right? And it's like, you don't know, like they oppose like you being there or whatever, but you're going to govern them just like floating above them in this bureaucratic machinery for their own good, so that you can send girls to school and give them gay rights or whatever. It's all for the goods, but they don't know because they're backwards and you can't change their minds, and there's nothing that can be done with them except to just rule over them. And that's how it's being applied. That's how things are being applied to America, where it's like, okay, well, we have this whole set of people who don't believe the state is legitimate anymore, but we're the state, so what do we do with them? It's like, well, we can just like surveil them and manipulate them, and put them in jails, maybe control their speech, etc. That's what's happening now, and it's not making anyone like the government more. Like if the facade starts to crack, you can't put it back together again. So the Zoomers, like, the thing is like, well, what can we believe in? Like, people are looking for something to believe in, because being in that eternal pose of like disaffected cynicism, at a certain point, it's like you're just gonna fucking kill people. You're just gonna blow yourself up. You're gonna do something stupid and self-destructive, because if you don't have any faith in anything or any project that extends beyond yourself, like you're going to succumb to despair civilizationally. And that's like suicide rates are how high. Like you can look at a million statistics for this drug rate, like overdose rates, etc. But then this very fact, like the fact that so many people have like killed themselves or like harboring those thoughts and are just like totally succumb to despair, this accelerates the lack of legitimacy in the society, in the sense where it's like, well, why would I have why would I have faith in this when it's doing this to my people, that around, like I see what's happening to them. How could I suddenly come to believe in this or have faith in the system? So you have to have faith in then a kind of counter hegemonic project, right? And that's what they're like, you got to give people hope and faith in something, in some way where things could get better. And the problem is that the problem itself is so bad that to be realistic about changing it requires its own sort of cynicism. So that's why you get these like leftists who they constantly just go closer and closer to the Democrats. Everyone knows that the real pipeline is that all of these radicals just end up supporting the hegemony because they get so disaffected that they start to just want to be superior to everyone else and rule over like everyone else is disaffected. Like if you're the most disaffected person, you're completely cynical about all of this, then why not be in the fucking CIA? Like, why not stand the CIA? Why not stand NATO? Why not stand the WEF? Because it pisses off all these people. You know what I mean? Like, you get this kind of then like demonic form of patriotism, which is you see more and more, where it's like on both sides to a degree, like QAnon in a certain way is that sort of like demonic patriotism in that way. But one of those is going to ultimately take power, and I think it's the side that is the kind of post-national the rules-based order, free world, the liberal countries that recognize these type of human rights that have been invented in the sense of like transhumanism, etc. I think that is the power. Well, also, that tends to correlate more with people that this hegemony actually wants, i.e., like people who are like elite service workers and college educated people from all over the place, like more from like the elite, or being cultivated into that thing. And then also like the petty bourgeois who enable them. So it's like, well, if you're like a Hollywood actor or whatever, which class are you going to line up with, right? Are you going to stand up for this? And that's like people worried about like cancel culture and things like this, because the parties are so clearly delineated by like you have the party of the deep state, and then you have this mess of a party, the Republicans, which don't even know what they stand for anymore, and that's an open question. Whereas the Democrats, everyone knows what the Democrats are. But the Democrats are going to be the Democrats. The Democrats are going to run right to the middle, and they just want to be in charge of the maintenance of this machinery. They make piecemeal reforms that don't actually end up doing anything or challenging power. But their main appeal, they constantly say, is, well, you don't want those crazy people to be in charge, right? The people in the party that's like the Republicans are like the fucking losers. You know what I mean? The Republicans is the party of cranks and wackos and people who are from these odd bits, an assemblage of America. Like the Republican demographic are not. It's not. For the most part, like sometimes like people you get like in finance or whatever, like in certain fields, there'll be more of a parity between Democrats and Republicans, but the best you get is like a 50-50 still, even in those things. So like where does like the real Republican base? It's like fucking the bottom. Like, you got all, and then where does all this cynicism towards those people come from? Well, if you're going into being cultivated as like a petty bourgeois, or like service worker, etc., you go to college, etc., you're gonna be like, why do all these poor people and these backwards people vote for against their interests? Like they're voting not for the Democrats, they're voting against their interests. So you're like, oh well, maybe we just need to govern them without their consent, because we know better and we're doing it for their own good. And that's really how it looks to me. I side with like the cranks. I like the Republicans because it's full of like fucking weirdos and shit. You know what I mean? Like the Republic, like, and that's like where all the comedy from the Democrats comes from, is that they're like, wow, look at these fucking weirdos. Like these people are like they're not having a normal one. Like the Republican, like it's so funny, you know. Whereas like the Democrats are all like kind of weird, but they're all like kind of they're inoffensively weird. They're just like neurotic, I guess. You know, you think about like Elizabeth, like AOC versus like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene's like, I think that it's possible that the forest fires were started by like an extraterrestrial breakaway government or whatever. You know, like the Alex Joneses of the world, the people who believe crazy things and they're like on the fringe of whatever. And then you look like AOC and she's like, well, we need to have like responsibility. Like we're, you know, it's two completely different ways of justifying themselves.
Yeah, I agree. Just not when like you get like these right wing types or these Republican types that are pretty much just like social libertarians. That's, I mean, it's been
I think
the
those guys are based. I think that
I don't agree because I feel like we should be able to distinguish, like, okay, we don't fuck with this shit, so let's not have it in society. But we do champion these things, and these are the things that should be championed, and anything else should kind of just be like doled out. So I don't know. I feel
so.
like
I
there's not
think
enough
that it's like,
Republicans that are
well,
strong on certain issues that I
I think
would
that
consider
social
myself
issues
strong
are
in.
actually things that people don't feel that strongly about. There's some things like obviously like when it comes to like public education and stuff like that. But the real question I think is like how do we like that like the problem with the public education system is that it's not very competitive in a lot of senses. So I think that like I'm opposed to teachers unions. Sorry, teachers, bye, get rid of your unions. So like for instance, like all of these things, like I have a lot of opinions that are similar to like the like libertarians on that side, because I think that they recognize that um, you know, you're not going to take over the state like that. You're competing. Like you think that a bunch of Republicans, like Republicans or like people, social conservatives for the most part, people uphold social conservative values. Do you think those people are like going into like the elite services? Like, do you think those people are like going to go work in Washington at like think tanks and things like that? No, they're not for the most part. Like the demographics of that base, they're like people who are like working in like the material economy and they don't want to have to work. They don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, so like for instance, like do you really want Ron DeSantis? Like, do you think Ron DeSantis type dudes like that are like the people that are gonna be in charge of like the Department of Education in such a way that they're like considered legitimate? You know what I mean? Um, it doesn't work like that. Like, look at like our education system was set up by the Rockefellers, right? But they use the state. They use the state like we have all these corporations. The corporations use the state for their own interests, but it's not really like our public education system, right? Like these criteria are put down. Like think about like George Bush did like No Child Left Behind. How good was that for the American education system? Like not that good. So in a lot of ways, like I think that trying to be like, oh, we're just going to take over the institutions and then we're just going to program them the way we want them to be. That's like what some of these right, like people quote unquote on the right think, but they're thinking like Democrats in that way, in the sense that they think that America should just be like that, in the sense that we take over. But like, what if you think like Ron Paul and you think you should just dissolve these things and allow people the freedom to make their own shit? Like, uh, we don't need to have like we could have a dynamic, competitive public education system for America, but it doesn't have to be run by the state. Like already, think about this realistically. Did you go to a public school?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, how much better is Khan Academy for teaching you math than your public school math teacher and a textbook and doing that stuff? Have you ever used Khan Academy?
Um, okay, I see where you're going, but I don't really like Khan Academy because most of the people teaching on like Khan Academy are like these Indian migrants, and I
I'm talking
like
about
the
math.
English is just really
Specific. I'm
bad.
only talking about this in regards to their math modules and things like that, because that's, I mean, at least when I was in high school, I learned like most of the subjects with other resources way better than what was provided to me by the state. And if anything, it was like kind of in the way. And I feel like most people were actually articulating that same thing. The people who were like the thing that was actually the most successful part of our school was that we had a trade school, which you know, had a lot of girls went to like the nursing track school there, but they had an electrician, like they trained electricians, they had carpentry, they had a bunch of different things, and pretty much everyone who went into the tech school has had a much better outcome than the people who didn't. And the majority. It's like that. So like, what you know what I mean? So it's like if you just have more of these accreditation facilities, or you have more ability for people to choose how they want to educate, because that's what Americans want. Americans don't want to be forced to do things. Like fundamentally, it's like I think it's like a spiritual thing. Like you can't just govern America like it's Norway or Denmark or something, because we have like a massive diversity in this country.
Yeah.
It's such a large landmass that this notion that we're going to have like a single like top down system is just impossible. It's like we can't govern things like that. We have to govern America like America. So like let's say like Vermont wants to maintain the way that it does its schools or whatever. Fine, don't care. But fundamentally, the issue is with this is with the federal government having too much power. Like we need to devolve more authority to the local level again, and more funding to the local level again, the way that China does. Because that's like what a real democracy is when people's main unit of concern, their main unit of political concern is their actual community and not the nation as a whole. It's like a complete insanity that everyone in America is supposed to have opinions on how to govern a fucking continent that is a superpower that has military bases all over the world. Like you, random guy, are supposed to have a fucking policy plan and understanding of geopolitical issues at that level. And meanwhile, you probably don't know how your own town is governed, or like there's all of the there's a complete misalignment of attention, which doesn't help anyone. So but you end up being forced to care more about those things, those individual concerns, as you get older, because it's like like I'm going through this right now. Like I have a kid, and I'm like, do I want to send my kid to American public schools? Like hell fucking no. Like hell fucking no. Like no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So then what's actually in my interest is for there to be better alternatives, because that's how more and more Americans are feeling. Like if the like what's wrong with some competition on this level? Like why, like we used to have the most schools. Why do we need to just have more funding to schools instead of having more schools and making schools like more affordable, and like just lowering the cost of living and things like that? Like there's a lot of that like I do think that type of conservatism in that sense is actually more revolutionary in a would be more be more effective in producing like communism in the way that we actually want it, than just being like, well, we just need to elect someone based in red pilled to be the commissar of education in America. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, I just want there to be like another. I just want us to have like a cultural golden age, and I don't think that we're getting there in the current state of affairs.
Well, no, but if you read like the Rockefeller Board of Education, like in their general education board, like when they were setting up what the goals of the American public schooling system as it exists today, the goal, they explicitly said they didn't want to give any of these kids any training in philosophy or in like literature and any of these things. They just wanted them to maintain their class position as it was. So these schools, the public school system, is actually designed to produce service workers, and it used to also produce like factory workers, but we don't have factory jobs anymore at the level that we did when we created these institutions, but they still function as if we did. So now what it is like, it's like, well, it's just a big sorting mechanism. That's what the American public education system actually is. It's just where we produce class consciousness in children by sorting them according to their perceived potential like payoffs in the future. So like that's how it actually, like, you're being sorted the entire time into like your class designation in the American public schooling system. But then there's like, oh well, look, isn't there a private schooling system? It's like, oh yeah, but that's only for kids who are actually rich, and that's where the actual talented teachers and things go because they get paid more, etc. Like we don't have a real universal American public school system, and we don't have just absolute privatization. We have this fucking bastard merger where there's just prisons, basically these like school prisons for people in the lower orders, and it's just designed to keep them there. The school to prison pipeline is like a real thing. You know what I mean? Like if you went to school in the south side of Chicago in a public school there, that's what you learn, is how to survive in those conditions. You don't learn you're not learning math and science. You're learning how you're being governed, number one. So like I went to a decent school, decent public school. Even then it wasn't that good. But what it was really designed to do was to sort out the children of like mostly service workers and commuters from the children of mostly tradesmen. So we had those two schools together, and most of the people I knew whose parents were in trades went to trade school, and all the people I know whose parents worked in the service economy, they were being pipelined to go to college to then do something in the service economy. Those are the two pipelines, right? So I mean, when I was much younger, I wanted to go to the trade school because I was like, I just want to be a writer, so I don't need to go to school. Like I can just write and I can just read on my own, and I just need to make money so that I can write. So then I should probably just learn a trade, and then I could do the trade and then write just whenever I feel like it. But everyone, institutions, the whole institution, everyone was like, no, you're fucking throwing away your potential, right? You'd be throwing away your potential. You got to go develop your potential by getting sorted out up into college, etc. And then you have to prove that's the whole thing. And like, I don't know. We don't have a good education system in that sense. It's not universal in the sense that it's trying to create an educated citizenry. It's just trying to sort people by their instrumentality.
Well, it was nice talking to you, Logo.
Yeah. I don't know what to do about that, though. I think that the only thing you can do is like, okay, this was a mistake. This is bad, so we're just going to get rid of it, and we'll start again. I think that's like, I'm a real revolutionary in that sense. I do think that we need to I fuck the Great Reset. It's not enough of a reset. They don't mean it for real. I mean the Great Reset. I mean we're gonna change, like completely destroy a lot of this federal machinery, and we're gonna rapidly devolve decision-making authority to more local levels so that people can be more autonomous. I think it's fine if there's communities in Texas who are, homeschooling their kids into like baptism or whatever the fuck their tradition is. And the same thing's true if people up in Vermont want to fucking, teach their kids about trans rights or whatever. That's fine. Just devolve authority to the fucking local level. That'll solve the problems. Like, we shouldn't be making decisions for other people's communities and societies here because we don't all agree, and we can't.
I'm probably going to get off in a sec unless anyone else comes on. But I could talk about American education more, I guess, for a sec. Because it's something I thought about a long time, because like that's really like what I was supposed to go into was education. Like that's like my familial vocation is it's like mostly service workers. I'm not going to lie, that's most of what it is. But it's like I have a ton of teachers in my family, especially public school teachers. And, it's not, or like I wanted to go be a professor or something, but it's like really what I want to do is I wanted to go to do this. Like I'm doing this. Like I'm privatized. Like I'm not working for the state. I'm working for myself in my little small nano business, right? Like, and I'm in the free market here of Twitter. So I think that's better. I feel like I've done a better job. I've probably reached more people, gotten more people interested in the things that I'm interested in, taught more about the things I would want to teach, and had more freedom to do it than I would have had I gone that route. And honestly, it's not like being a public, you don't make that much money doing that anyway. So it's really like, if I reach parity with that, like by doing what I do, then maybe we should just have more people doing the type of thing. Like, realistically, all the kids in America are just being raised on YouTube videos anyway. Like, we talk about high school as like being this like meaningful zone of socialization, but what that really means is like the extracurricular activities, number one, and number two, that you're just putting all of these people in the same place at the same time while their parents go to work. And there's a million different ways that we could manage that. It doesn't mean that everyone would have to go to the same place.
we could have different places. You could go one place one day different. What if you spent all day in the library instead of going to school and you were like following this thing, and you could get accreditations for various things from various competing entities or whatever. Like, you're taking the SAT ultimately in order to get into colleges, and that's owned by the College Board, which is a private corporation, which is actually owned by Bill Gates. So you're making use of all of these privatized services anyway, these corporate services that, like, all the difference is that the schools districts are paying subscription fees to them, things like that, or at least you have to pay how much money to take the SAT. I guess you could apply for a grant to get the money paid off. We have this fucking bastard system. It's awful. That's why people here hate socialism, is because we're never going to do the totalitarian dream of the social democrats, where we just like disallow all forms of private education, which would mean effectively that if like you are from like a religious community background here or whatever, right, and you're like, okay, I want my kids to go to rabbinical school and like learn the Torah, or you're like Muslim and you want your kids to like go to a school where they learn about that, or you're a Christian of some type and you're like, well, I want my kids to be raised with these types of values or whatever in this private education. The social democrat people, they're the ones who want to take all of that away. So that's what they're saying, like, no, we should just disallow this. We should force everyone in this, like, this was like the whole point. Integration as a policy was not pushed by black people themselves. It was pushed by the Rockefellers. Black people themselves already had schools, right? Like, in America, like before we did integration, there was a ton of like historically black universities, their black communities. They all had their own things. They owned their own things. They wanted that in the first place. We were the ones who went and interceded to create this sort of like unipolar American zone of socialization in the public school. But what if people don't want to be all uniform? What if like America is actually an extremely diverse place where you have like fucking Amish people, you have Mormons, and you have all of these different types of people? Like, what do you do with them? Like, they don't want to be subsumed in the state project. They want to do their own thing too. So that's really like the issue, and that's why the left here is different than it is in other places, because America is fundamentally a sort of patchwork state of myriad people groups, and there's not really a singular cohesive American identity in anything except that is produced by the state institutions, like in the military. And more so, it's the state corporate mergers. So it's really like Hollywood produces this sense of identity and fandom, or whatever, being a gamer or whatever. Those are the things that are producing people's identities in a more broad sense. All right, Elliot, what's up?
I've been unmuted. Hi, Logo. Long-time listener, first-time caller. How are you doing?
I'm good. What can I do for you?
Right. I really liked what you were saying about your experience about this kind of working class public pipeline situation, and then I kind of got lost when you were talking about like democratic socialists and like
what I mean is
the supposed like force that like doesn't want like rabbinical schools and like Catholic schools or whatever. But I think
if you actually read
if
you read like a lot of those people, they'll say like really like we need to have more need to have more of a state role in this, and that means also like getting rid of private education in general, because it's like basically the two models for education going forward were like charter schools, and then there's like public schools. So there are people who want to push like for the state's role in education being to give stipends for people to make a market decision regarding the education of their children. So it's like, instead of going to the public school, and then there's the property tax version, where it's like, well, you have all these like upper middle class people who their public schools are pretty good because they have a lot of money in property taxes that goes to fund that, and they're like overseeing it themselves, etc. But then you have like, well, what's the public education like for the poor? And what that's like is like, well, those have to be funded elsewhere because they're not making their money from property taxes, because a lot of these people, like, their properties aren't worth that much, and all of those property taxes aren't, and so it's a complicated situation. But a lot of the people who want to do education reform, what they want to do is to have what the Nordic model has. And in the Nordic model, or like in a lot of the continental models, there are no private education. There's no private education at all. Like it's all state service. Like like all education is owned by the state.
Right. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I can't help but to feel like the problem is poverty itself. And I think I hear what you're saying about the councils and the charters and people being kind of bussed into like better schools. And, this is kind of like a mini version of almost like a mini Spandrel in every kind of metropolitan city where, kids in worse neighborhoods they'll get bussed into the better school, and it'll just get worse and worse. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. I can't help but to be overcome by like hopelessness sometimes for the U.S. kind of situation, because it does seem like
Yeah, I think
the
you
problem
have to
is
have
poverty, and
you have
yeah.
to have a global view to have hope as an American citizen right now, because there's no reason. Like, I think it's fucked up of people to be like, to like gaslight. Everyone's like gaslighting each other. It's like, oh no, like things are gonna get better or whatever. But it's like generational. At least older people will do this. To be like, oh, you can't think like that. That's like, you got to have the power of positive thinking. Be like, well, I'll make it work for me. But it's like there's no reason to have faith in the American institutions, because they're failing objectively, and they're actively bad. So if you want to have hope for the future, you have to look outside of America, because America is not the only country in the world. It's by no means even the most advanced country in the world anymore. So there's like better stuff happening elsewhere, and it's like we have to like be more like the places that are doing better, that are like improving. And so then you have to have hope that we can somehow change this. But that is only going to be possible when it fails.
Right.
So,
I mean, I'm here in the UK, and the one good thing about the UK is you're talking like a critique of the SAT, but at least one thing the UK has is they have a kind of standard test for each like level, and the US is kind of destandardizing, which I don't know. Maybe you're for this kind of thing.
well, actually, I'm not. I'm really not, in a weird way, because the reason for that is because they're just trying to make a more like, so they're just trying to, so okay, we're like the whole representation thing, like racial representation amongst the service class, big issue that everyone cares about, is amongst the petty bourgeois. We need to make sure that we cultivate a petty bourgeois equally across all of these different racial demographics. So that means you have to allow more of these people to get into schools that they wouldn't get into based on merit, because we need to have the percentages right, and that's what people are opposed to. You know what I mean? So it's like, for instance, we're like one of the people who are like most hurt by it in America actually are Asian Americans, because they get selected against, because they're overrepresented in elite institutions compared to the amount that they make up as a percentage of the population. So it's like, are these institutions really designed for just the rewarding of merit and credentials to the people who objectively meet those merits and credentials based off of this type of testing, this meritocratic testing, or is it something else? So what is that something else that it could be? It's ultimately this more nebulous sense of of representing America, I guess. So then you have this sort of fucked situation where people want to then get rid of like, for instance, they're getting rid of the SATs for like college admissions and stuff. Do you know who that hurts the most? That hurts poor white people the most out of every single demographic. That specific policy, because you could be a poor white person and still score really high on the SATs, and then you'd be able to go to like a better school. But if you're but you wouldn't have had like maybe necessarily the ability to cultivate all of these extracurriculars and things like this, these other things that are taken account for in the college admission process. So it's really selecting like for it really benefits the children of wealth, because then you have these like dumb rich kids who maybe they even went to a really good school, but they just don't have it in them to get to like qualify for these more elite institutions. But their parents obviously want them to qualify for these elite institutions so that they can maintain a part of the same class. They don't want to have lower class mobility from their like upper middle class station. So even though maybe your parents are like a physicist and a fucking surgeon, maybe you're not, you know, and maybe you wouldn't be able to get into the schools that they got into based off of your own merits. But if we get rid of the merit based thing, now we can just talk about like what other things are on the college application that they're judging by. Well, it's like your background, your extracurriculars, your like literal self-narrativization, like your college essay. So then when it comes to these things, the more money you have, the more you can fucking preen those up, right? The more you
Right.
can make those
I,
look really good.
you said we need to like look outside of the US. In one place, I do mental health work and I talk with people all over the world. And one place that really stands out to me in terms of a society, because it's quite small, they can take care of the members of the society, but a society that kind of works in this function like you were talking about, of how you could have maybe like a middle class or upper class like parents and a working class child. It seems like you know, not to be Bernie Sanders, but it seems like Denmark actually has this.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
And
right?
I
So then,
can't.
but if you
But
apply
wait,
that model,
Sorry,
if
I
you
won't
apply that model
interrupt
here,
you
it doesn't
again. I
work.
promise. But I just want to make this one final kind of thing, which is uh, the problem itself is, you know, it kind of flows down from poverty and poor living standards itself. Because people have decent living standards, you can have this like crazy class mobility. I don't
Well, it's
know if it
also
can
an
be fixed in
extremely
education.
homogenous
Yeah.
society. It's also an extremely homogenous society where they don't have as much diversity when it comes to pretty much every single thing, right? Like most people in Denmark are fucking Danish, and they're having more issues with like immigration and stuff now or whatever. But it's nothing like the America. America is a completely different place in every single state, and within states, it's completely different places all over the place. It's like a massive diversity of peoples, of religions, of a million different things. Um, so
Well,
we can't actually do that because there's not enough agreement
well,
upon
diverse, but like you said,
anything.
massive diversity. But I feel like that first word's more important. You know, it's fucking massive. Like the U.S. is massive.
Yeah, but it's not only massive; it's also the one of the most, if not the most diverse country in the entire world when it comes to the amount of different peoples and like different religions and different things that exist inside of it, right?
Right. Well, I think this is, yeah, there's a bigger question of, is it diversity, or is, you know, the America is just like an enlightenment project, and this is like the kind of scary thing about America. I think there's like the reactionary line that it's diverse America, but it's also like experimental enlightenment history America. Like we have 200
We don't
years of
we
history.
don't live in
This
that
shit.
America. We live in the America that was produced in the 20th century through the world wars. Like we don't live in an enlightenment project. We live in a Rockefeller project. We live in the Rockefeller projects. Like that's that's what we live in. Like this is not Thomas Jefferson's America. This is not George Washington's America. This isn't even Abraham Lincoln's America. We live in Rockefeller's America. Like the content, like to even believe there's like a continuity between these like republics, I think is like part of the like that's why our history textbooks are such fucking messes, because we have to
I
believe there's like a continuous narrative of America and all of this makes sense.
I hear what you're saying, but I think we are living in the consequence where people identify with their political viewpoints and their my freedoms and my free speeches and this sort of
I feel
thing.
like you're just
You know,
talking. I think you're talking pejoratively, because actually the people who
I'm really not
I
trying
know
to
you're
talk.
not, or maybe you're
Okay,
not intending
wait,
to.
I'll try to be not be pejorative.
Okay, but
I
let me
mean,
explain.
I'll be more
Those
straightforward
people
and less rhetorical. So, like,
Those people
I
are the
think we're.
revolutionaries today. Okay, think about this. The people who are like, hey, I want to uphold the Bill of Rights the Constitution, all of these Enlightenment values that like all of these rights that we've been given, I want to uphold these. Those are the people who are that are calling for a revolution because we don't have those things. That's the irony. Like, we don't have a constitution, really. We don't have our rights, actually. Like, that's the thing, is like you're saying it's the consequence of that. But I'm saying that we actually don't have those things. So the reason why people hold on to those things and they're like, hey, like, these are things I know, is because that was supposed to be the basic thing we could have as Americans, is that we would have our Bill of Rights, our rights, right? That's it. Like, everything else, no matter what's happening, like, you have the Second Amendment, and that's like, you can't touch that, etc.
I don't think it's, I really don't, and I don't want to speak pejorative. I won't use memes because I don't want to like put you off. I didn't mean to do that. Uh, I really don't think it's a crisis of like these rights are disappearing. I think these rights are still present in terms of like free speech, and corporations have private things and they can cancel people, and this is also free speech, and like the rights are still there. I honestly think it's more of a crisis of history for Americans, and a crisis of
We don't have free
being
speech.
unable to.
We don't have free
We don't.
speech in that way. No, we don't, because the types of free speech legislation that applied to, let's say, the publishing of newspapers and books doesn't apply when you're on these corporate platforms. So then it's like a completely different question. Like, we've
In a
lost
literal
those
sense,
rights.
we do have the free, like, yeah, we don't have free speech on a corporate platform.
Why
but
not?
it's
You have
still,
free speech on your telephone, don't you? Like, when you talk to other people on your phone, like, you can say whatever you want on the phone. Like, AT&T can't stop you from saying anything on the phone, because we have like legislation that was governing like telegraph lines and things like that, which made it so that you could express free speech on those platforms, because those platforms were like ultimately public infrastructure. But isn't Twitter public infrastructure? Or is Twitter a private corporation?
Twitter
We don't.
is literally a private corporation. It
Yeah,
could
but
be
sure.
public infrastructure.
But how
Yeah.
was Twitter made? Twitter was made by the state. Like, Twitter was funded by the state. Like, all of these things are actually produced by like this. Again, I'm telling you, the actual America that exists. There's a completely unconstitutional coup of the military-industrial complex, which rules a virtual state that people think has power, etc. But that's all fake. Like, the politicians aren't the people who govern America. The people who govern America are meeting in boardrooms. The people who govern America are completely unaccountable.
Well, the way that these corporations work is you can buy politicians to put through the policies that your corporation needs, right? So this is the problem with capitalist liberal democracy. Right?
Yes, corporations have free speech, but individuals no longer do. Like, we recognize corporations as persons, and we govern the corporations. Like, the corporations have rights. Like, the corporations have more rights than you and I. So is that the Enlightenment project, where it's
Well,
like, do
corporations have more
individuals have
power.
rights? Or
Yeah, I mean, corporations have more power than you and I. I have certain rights. Corporations have to follow
should
more
they?
restrictions, but they're larger entities with more power than me personally, right? So this is like the Enlightenment project. Still, I would like say I don't think this is like a perversion of the Enlightenment project. This is the bourgeois revolution. Like, we're living the bourgeois revolution, you know.
Well, I don't think that's really. I don't feel like you're that acquainted with American history. I'm not gonna lie, just from the way you're talking about it.
Okay.
How like how is this the how is the massive technocratic infrastructure around the executive branch and the Department of Defense, like, how are these constitutional? How are these inevitable outgrowths of the American Constitution?
We don't really care about the law as much as we care about growing businesses and protecting the
What do you
rights.
mean by we?
Sorry.
Who do you mean by
Sorry,
we?
I mean we Americans.
I
Sorry,
don't
I
think
mean
that's true.
this is a good
I think
point.
there's actually massive
There is no
disagreement on
we
this.
Americans. There is no commons in terms of there's no commons American common good idea like there is in England or
Yeah,
Denmark
there
or
is.
any
But
country.
how did Abraham Lincoln describes this in the Gettysburg Address? Like, this is the commons is the Constitution and your Bill of Rights. That's the only thing that we have as a commons, actually. And It's not even effective anymore. So actually, the people who are trying to
A
maintain the
commons is not a
commons,
bill or a law. The commons is a
I'm telling
shared
you about the
public
American
utility, right?
context. I'm
No, I
talking
know,
about the
but
American
but
context.
like the American context, if the American context is removed from what the commons means historically
Okay,
in
if
the
you're talking about a
world,
complete virtual
no, it's no. I
abstraction
mean, the
with no
virtual
bearing
thing is to
whatsoever
say
on
it's like,
reality, sure.
well, no, the virtual thing is to say that the Constitution, this is the most virtual thing you can say, which is that the Constitution is a commons. The commons is a shared public utility, right? Like, this is
The
like
Constitution
the
wasn't a
fact that
shared public
in
utility.
if an American commons is a piece of paper, then
It's not a piece
truly
of
we are in
paper.
transcendental idealism, Kantianism. We are living the Kantian dream. Our commons is transcendental. It's not real public utility, right? Feel free to correct my understanding of Americanism, because like I don't want to take your space like
You
this.
could
So
you could be you're accurately describing like how this has come to be, but like was Kant an American? Like where's the influence of Kant on the Constitution? Like
did
where did
Kant
the
directly
Constitution come
influence?
from?
No, I think maybe Kant is even an echo of the American Revolution, even.
Okay, but where did the ideology, the people who wrote the Constitution, they were writing, this was the sense of the commons, was the body of liberties that we held in common. Like the government was the commons. Like the American Republic was produced as a common like state, as opposed to being governed virtually by the British Empire. What I'm saying is that we're governed virtually now. Like we're in the same position as, like, we're not governed by the American Republic. We don't have a republic. It's an empire. So we're in the same position. Like you could say, like, there's a lot of reasons why this all happens, but I don't think it's for the reasons you're describing. I think it's for the reasons of a larger conglomeration of interests amongst the what's called Anglo-Saxony, for instance, like the British Empire. Like when America and the British Empire stopped being oppositional when it came to geopolitics, but we came in and we bailed all of this out. We got rid of the America that existed. We sacrificed that on the altar of the 20th century because we got involved in all of this shit. We got involved that we built up a globe spanning military and bases everywhere. Like that's not in the Constitution. The Constitution says that like we're not even supposed to have a standing army. Okay, so it's like, is this really the Enlightenment project, or is this like actually America's Enlightenment project becoming subsumed by the British Empire again? Like that's effectively what's happened. If you look at like where did the CIA come from? Where did a lot of these larger things come from? Well, it came from the like international financial class, like finance. These people were the ones organizing all this. Like why? When did we get the Federal Reserve? Like and if you talk like who actually talks about this history, by the way, the only people who talk about this history are people who give a fuck about their constitutional rights. They're the only people who fucking give a shit at all about any of this, because that's the real commons in America, is your rights. Like that's not all we want. We want to produce more rights. Like we want a right to X, Y, and Z. That's what we want to produce. That's what American communism will be. Is like we want a right to this. Like we want to eliminate. Like we want to. That's what the whole point is. What like all of these rights are extensions of this Enlightenment project, you could say, but it's much older than the Enlightenment. It's much older than the Enlightenment. It goes back to the Reformation.
I I hear you. I would just I think my fundamental, you could say Sternerite leftist kind of thing is like my I don't think this commons idea or protecting the rights thing is necessarily going to establish me as a citizen who is unperturbed. Like you have to create a structure and a society around you somehow, or around other people, and figure out what
Do you
that
know
is.
where that society comes
This kind
from?
of structure
That
that
society is
supports other people
produced
is
from the
this kind of
people
structure
who
that
are
supports people, for instance, in the
doing that.
UK with the NHS or public housing projects in the UK. I think that's would if you just
No,
introduce
that shit's
those two
awful. Your
United
system's
Kingdom
terrible. Your
things.
system's so fucking terrible. It's rotting. It's falling apart. We don't want to follow that.
Fair.
Americans are smarter than thinking that
Fair.
Britain is a
Fair
model
enough.
to fucking follow. No one wants to
I,
be like that fucking shithole. Nobody.
you
Did you
realize
hear
that you
Walt
can get,
Whitman?
if you're not
Did you hear Walt
working,
Whitman? The hoggishness of the British fucking. You're run by banks. We know that. We know that. We don't want to be like you. We
I love how
don't.
I'm
We
the
have nothing to do
representative
with
for
it.
England, the American who kind of wandered into England. But I mean, like, what I'm
You're
just
saying that
saying
the
is that the
NHS, like what we need is
Constitution,
just an NHS,
the
and we just
idea that the
need,
Constitution is something that will free us rather than a society that doesn't have like thousands of people on Skid Row. Like, I just don't buy it. I feel like I want to back out and I want to like let you talk because like
All right.
I got the same shit
All right.
over and
Yeah.
over.
All right.
I'm
Peace,
not. I
man.
don't. No, I'm happy to talk, but I
I don't
prefer
know.
to listen. I prefer to listen to you versus listen to myself.
Well, I'm trying
So,
to explain to you like
yeah.
that we have a long way to go in America, but I think that you're focusing on the wrong things. Because like, do you want the Department of Defense and the people who govern America right now, and this whole system? Do you just want them to give them complete control over more things? Like,
No.
you want to give them, okay, so like we're just gonna, okay, well, we'll just do like a state health thing, and we'll just conglomerate all of these things. That's actually how it already works, right? Like, do you think that like Pfizer and all of these other, do you think they actually just run like as capitalistic, like private endeavors? Like, no, they get all their money from the state. They get all their money from grants from the state and things like that. Like, that's what we already have.
But people have to pay for it in a degree that they don't in the UK, is the point.
Okay, so then you're just talking about making these like piecemeal reforms which already exist, where it's like, okay, we'll put a price ceiling or a price floor on this, and it's like, okay, is that going to solve everything? Like,
even more important than healthcare, I would even say, is housing. In terms of how do you house people in the U.S. who are on Skid Row, and this kind of goes into like a wider homeless question. This is, like I said before, which is education, and all this is downstream from like, we don't have a net for poverty that's high enough. Like, we do have proper fucking they live dystopia in the US, and it fucking sucks, you know?
Sure, but it's like, okay, do you know what actually is going to happen? Like, so basically, be like, okay, well, we just need to like have places to put these people. Okay, so we're just going to build tent camps that are then getting grants from the state to be run in the way that they do. That's what they're doing in San Francisco. They do that anywhere. So, we'll just put them in mental asylums. Okay, yeah, it'll solve it. We just need to make sure that why don't we just put them in prison? You know, then they'll give them food. You know, they can work for slave labor. Like, why don't we just put all the homeless people in prison? Then they'll have a home. It's owned by the state, you know, union guys are looking over it, professional staff to make sure, you know, that they don't get into any trouble. They're not a danger to themselves or others. Just put them all in prison. That's how America is going to do it.
I mean,
like, this is what it looks like. So it's like, yeah, if we don't care about the homeless person's constitutional rights, then just put them all in prison. That's where we're going, buddy. That's why like when we talk about the American like Bill of Rights and these things as being like the last shreds of our commons, is like, if we do the opposite and we go like, okay, well, that doesn't really matter. We just need to be utilitarians and make policies that work and just make sure people have places to go, and there's a net to catch people so that they're looked after in a welfare state. Then okay, we'll just put them all in prison. That's what's going to happen.
That would be a very bad solution. I agree that would be a very bad solution to put them all in prison.
That's already what we do, and that's all anyone's suggesting.
No, I'm suggesting that there's extensive public housing works, and that public funds are.
Those are prisons, man. Have you ever seen Section 8 housing?
Yeah. Prisons are a form of public housing, but also
actually the prisons are cleaner. Well. The prisons are cleaner, and they're better taken care of as properties. Because if you go, like, dude, one of my friends, his last job was cleaning Section 8 housing, and it's a private company, again, being contracted by the state to go in and like clean up these publicly owned housing units that are not taken care of by the people who live in them, because they know that it's not actually their property, and they can get kicked out of it at any time because they don't own it and they're just being housed there. They don't take good care of it. So you got all this like black mold everywhere. And then you have these people who are hired as contractors to come in and clean it. And they go, okay, I'm going to actually do my job and try to clean this. They go, nope, we don't have enough time. You got to clean like 12 units today. We only get this much for the contract. You're wasting your time doing this. It doesn't matter. They're going to make it dirty anyway. And that's how America actually works. So,
yeah.
So when in a way, I'm going to do the Irish, like Swiftian, like brutal satire here. It would be better to put them in prison. They would have better food. They would have better accommodations in a prison than in Section 8 housing.
Okay, so you're saying that homeless people would be better in prison than having public housing. That's fine.
In America,
if that's what
yeah,
you're saying, that's what you're saying.
Because of my point is really to condemn the quality of public housing in America. Because you can say you have this and you provide this, but go do a tour of public housing in America. Like, go look at what the conditions are actually like.
Yeah, it should probably be better, right?
Well, it's like, how are you going to make it better?
By funding people to...
So just more money. You just give it more money. It's like, what about all the corruption? What about all the corruption? Like, where does all that money actually end up going? Does it go into making how do you make it accountable? How do you actually do that?
Let's iron out the details. We'll figure it out. We'll make a plan for
I'm saying it would be better if these people could own their own houses and they take care of it themselves, because I trust people to do a better job taking care of themselves, and I trust these state services to take care. I want people to take care of themselves. I want them to own their own things.
I mean, that's a fundamental difference then between like a kind of communist or socialist idea and a capitalist idea. That's fine.
No, but I'm communist. That's what communism is. Communism doesn't mean, oh, you're just taken care of by the state. This is the irony. When people like you talk about socialism and communism to Americans, they can tell that it's not what they mean by communism in China. Realistically, they're not educated enough generally to know what China is actually like and how their civic structure actually works.
Communism is when people take care of themselves and pay for their own housing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Communism is when there's such a superfluity and such an abundance created in the Commonwealth that people have the means to take care of themselves. They have their own property. They have their own means of production. Like, they can take care of themselves and manifest themselves. They're not just wardens of the state or like zoo creatures owned by the capital, by the fucking richest people, which is what socialism in America really means. Like, Rockefeller was a socialist. Carnegie was a socialist. They called themselves socialists. They were progressives. This is the tradition of America when it comes to people talking about socialism and blah, blah, blah. What it means is just putting people in, like, just making money off of them. It's like the same thing with our charity system. It's not actually for the good of the people it claims to serve. It's for the good of the people who produce the systems. And we pretend it's otherwise. But it's like, who's Section 8 housing good for? Is it good for the people who live in it? No, they all hate it. They all wish
everyone who has public housing. Like, I think the problem with America is like Americans versus people in other countries, even including Mexico. Like, Americans don't really know how to advocate for their own interests because they are caught up.
Did you hear when I did?
I'm disagreeing with you. They're caught up in their own interests.
By the way,
they think that referring to the Constitution or ethics or transcendental idealism will like save them somehow.
Exactly. I actually already had discourse with you in my head earlier on this. People in the chat, do you remember when I was talking about when people from the college educated service sector people start talking about how the actual working class people who are educated on their constitutional rights and want to maintain these things, how they condescend to them and talk about how they're not actually advocating their own self-interest, but this guy here knows their self-interest better than anyone. Do you see that? Where does this come from? It's a petty bourgeois ideology.
Working class people, really.
No, it's petty bourgeois. The working class people know what they want. The working class people don't need you to advocate for them. They already advocate for the things that they want, and what they want is to own their own things. It's that simple. Like, they don't want what you think that they should want.
Working class people want capitalism, and this is the idea they want their own.
Well, yes, they want capitalism, i.e. compared to what we have now, capitalism would be a fucking improvement. If we got rid of all of those state services, we got rid of the entire welfare state, we just completely fucking destroyed that. We destroyed the legislation that enables the existence of these monopoly corporations, etc.
I think the working class people want capitalism and that I'm an overeducated service sector person. That's fine. It's just, at least we can delineate a line of disagreement. I don't think that people want capitalism. I think people want...
No, what they want is communism. What they want is communism, but not the kind you want. They want their communism. They don't want your communism. They want their communism.
They want housing, healthcare, and less financial.
Yes, but they want their own.
You know?
Do you see? They want their own housing. They don't want your housing. They don't want to be provided housing by the state. They want to own their own things. That's what Americans want. That's what the working class of America wants. Everyone in Section 8 housing, what do they want? They want to own their own house. Okay? They don't want to live in Section 8 housing.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so how do we get it so that they can own a house?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think I'm going to step out and not. This is not me like frustrated.
That's fine,
because
man.
I want to
This is
listen
an
to you. Because I
educated-
want to listen to you, and I don't want to take up more space.
I'm almost done anyway, but it's been educative. Peace out, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this last one. We got Jay. I gotta be off in like 10 minutes. What's up, Jay? What can I do for you? I think Jay's not coming. So, all right, sorry, Jay. Didn't hear you. This will be the last one. Bromo butterfly. What can I do for you?
That's a nice picking pattern, man.
Oh, that one's really easy. That's just a really base. That's just 2 fingers. That's nothing.
Yeah, I play myself sometimes, so it all sounds good to me.
Yeah, I really enjoy doing that. It's fun. That one especially. I don't know. I like fucking. There's really guitars. Really, you kind of realize how simple it is once you do more of it, I guess. But I always felt like guitar was much harder than it actually is, and now I'm just like, God, this is all so stupid. Like I'm trying to find like new harder things to do.
Believe me, there are plenty of new hard things to do. You could get into like harmonics and
I know
things like that.
Harmonics is just a gimmick, though. Harmonics is fun, but it's kind of just gimmick. You go, boo. Oh, when I hear a harmonic, I can do a harmonic.
Well, all I wanted to say.
Ooh.
All I wanted to say in response to that dude who just left is that basically people don't want to be thieves. Like people don't want to be like a drain on the system or whatever. People want to build things. People want to be productive. People want to, they want to own their own houses. They want to build their own houses. They want to take, something that's fallen apart and build it back and make it better, make it their own. Like that's what people really want to do.
They want
like,
more freedom to do stuff like that because, like, honestly, they just like don't. It's like, okay, let's say like, listen, man, I just want to fucking grow shit in my yard. I want to have a chicken coop. I want to just have a small house out in the country. Blah blah blah. It's like, okay, that's like, how much is that going to cost you? And then it's like, okay, you got to pay all these things. It's like it's just not affordable. It's like we need to make the whatever we can do to lower the cost of living for Americans and to enable them to, do more of their own fucking things. Like we don't like everything's already too centralized. Like the Chinese have a much more dynamic system than us. Like we act like they're all like centrally controlled, but we're actually far more centrally controlled by the banks and by these major corporations. They're far more rigid in their control than, like, let's say in China. Like look at farms, for instance. In China, they have tons in the rural areas. They have tons and tons and tons and tons of farmers, and people are doing like direct to consumer, like pretty advanced stuff when it comes to like growing produce and stuff. But in America, we have these massive farming conglomerates. Like, you got Bill Gates buying up all the damn farmland and stuff like that.
And where you have the like direct to consumer type of stuff, that's considered like a sort of bourgeois luxury, right? That's considered like fancy.
Well, it's like, basically what it is like these are people who it's like now you have farmers who are also simultaneously like influencers on like fucking TikTok, and they're like, hey, here's the farm today, right? Like I'm working on the farm today, and like we just got these apples in, and you can actually buy these on our shop. People are like, oh, okay, so they have like literally like a personal relationship with like a small farm in the provinces or whatever that they buy their produce from. There's like things like that, like that's what communism actually looks like in the Chinese context, and it's like Americans, when they imagine communism, they're not imagining like, oh, I can own my own farm and I can own my own business and stuff. But in China, they're like, hey, if you want to, where the Communist Party's job is to enable you to make your own business, like to enable you to be productive and to like, manifest yourself. So we're like enabling this by making sure the cost of living is really low, and so that you can accumulate capital, etc. Like that's what people actually want. The Chinese realize that. That's why they didn't go along with the Soviet Union. They actually followed a lot of American economic policy when it came to that, because they saw that our society was more affluent than the Soviet society, who had all this central planning. And the Maoist reforms didn't work that well. So it's really Deng Xiaoping who comes in and he's like, we're gonna fucking be pragmatic communists. Like, whatever fucking gets people, like whatever works. You want to
That's
own
what
your
we
own
need.
house?
That's what
Good.
we really need is a sort of whatever works. Like all this, like obviously, we can call it communism, and other people are going to say that it's not, or say that China's revisionist or whatever they want to say. But ultimately, like it won't matter if the mindset is do it if that's what works. Like if that's what people want, if that's what is going to get you there, then that's what you do.
Yeah, well, it's like that's the thing, right? Where it's like I'm saying, like, well, Americans don't actually want to live in state housing. They want to own their own things. They want to own their own house. The house that they live in, they want to own. They don't want to rent it from other people. People don't like being rentiers, right? Because you're getting fucking fucked, and people also don't want to be in prison. And that's basically what, if you're making public housing, do you know what public housing is? It's called prison. Like that's public housing. That's the reality of it. In China, they're not like giving, like it's not public housing. It's like they have just as much of a market in these things as we do. It's just that it's governed differently. Like we don't need to eliminate the market entirely. This idea that it's like that the market, communism is when there's no market and everything's just run by the state is fucking backwards as hell. That's like the real revisionism. But all these like Western Marxists and Western type people who just like think that the Soviet Union was this great success that we should all follow, and like that's the model for the future is to like do that, is just fucking insanity. Or it's like, oh, Sweden's the exact example of that. It's like, well, no, I disagree. Sweden is not, we can't govern America like Sweden. Actually, America's a lot more like China in the fact that it's fucking huge. We have these massive prairies, and like we have a ton of agriculture in our economy in a way that Sweden does not. Like we can't govern ourselves like one of these Baltic commercial states where they don't, like they're run on like what they have, like their oil and their rare earth minerals, and they have financial services. I don't know. We can't do that. We are bigger. Well, most of the American, like we're America, like what's one of our greatest exports? Grass. Like I feel like it's like people like, talking about touching grass. It's like drive across all of Wyoming. Like just go drive across the entirety of Wyoming. It's like there are people who are there's farmers, there's people who are working in that level, and like to tell them that they should that they're not advocating their own self-interest by wanting to maintain ownership of their own property, their own means of production, and instead it would all be much better off if it was governed by the corporate state. Like it's just stupid. I don't know. This is why it's going to take a really long time to explain things is because we're so fucking psyoped when it comes to our own terminology and stuff like that. Like that guy, he's like obsessed with like calling that capitalism, and it's like, oh, that's just like an enlightenment thing. Like, oh, that's so Kantian and ideal and abstract. It's not abstract to the people who are talking about it. They're talking about their actual meat and potatoes, fucking reality, their material reality right around them. Someone who owns a farm, their own like small farm, and wants to do that, they don't want the state to tell them how to fucking run their farm. Obviously.
I'm guessing you've read Michael Parenti's Assassination of Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the relevant bit of that is tangential to this is that like the basically the death of the Republic there was when there were no more small landowners, right?
That's where we're getting to. Yeah. It's already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the condition that precedes like all of the like the breakdown of all their institutions, like the Sulla versus Marius and all of that. Like that all comes from the fact that basically people didn't own land anymore. It was all like if you owned land, you were probably a senator. And yeah, that's where we're headed. And the grain dole, like, you know, every year they were like, should we expand the grain dole? Like everyone's on the grain dole. How much of the labor is going to be free labor versus slave labor? Like these are questions that
we're
you're
increasing
dealing
the
with
prison
once it's over.
population too, because you know, and we have like a ton of illegal, like we're talking about like illegal aliens, like doing migrant labor and things like that. It's like that's effectively a slave. It's literally slavery.
It's the same thing.
It's literally slavery. It's literally slavery. So then it's like fucked up because then it's like if you're like, okay, well, we shouldn't actually just allow like the kind of import of slaves to work for oligarchs on their latifundia fucking estates. Maybe we shouldn't allow that. Maybe that's bad. People are like, wow, that's how dare you. They're just trying to like improve their own conditions. So we can't punish people who are trying to seek asylum by becoming slaves in America. Like, maybe we shouldn't allow ourselves to have slaves. Maybe slavery is bad and we shouldn't allow that. But, you know, you can't, I don't know. Things are bad.
Well, they're
like,
just doing the jobs that Romans won't do.
Yeah, there's certain jobs Romans won't do. We really need to get those Berbers. We need to get those Amazigh tribes like at the fringes of the empire. We'll just go get them. There's some jobs that are beneath the dignity of a Roman citizen. Yeah, that's really what it's like, man. But I got to get off on this, and because
same.
It's my shift. I got to watch my daughter here. So, all right, peace out, everyone.
Good stuff.
God bless y'all.
See ya.